Shot just had a thing 2 weeks ago talking about Social Security, made exactly the same point, that workers pay both the employee and the employer portions of Social Security. So everything I'm saying here is not controversial among Congress at all. The idea is that when you charge part of it to the employer, that affects future wage and benefits decisions. And in a competitive labor market, ultimately, that full amount gets passed through to the worker in terms of what wages and the benefits they get in the future from that worker. The economic theory is really clear on this. The empirical work is also relatively clear that that pass-through happens. So the problem is with the 50-50 is that workers are paying the full amount, but they don't see it. And that creates some dysfunction with the program because in terms of workers don't see the full amount they're paying, whereas if it's coming out of their paycheck, they see the full amount they're paying, they can judge the amount they're paying against the benefit they get, and that then you have a functional political model in terms of voters supporting the level of cost and the level of benefit they want.
And then the rest of the data, they're saying it's 100% of employers do that they.
When I say 100% pass through, I mean like typically 100% of the tax gets passed through. One other piece of information I gave in a previous meeting was that when the current Congressional Budget Office, one of the things the Congressional Budget Office has to do is calculate tax burden for exactly how tax burdens fall for different new taxes. It's a requirement. And their own internal guidelines are anytime there's a payroll tax or a tax on labor, they automatically assign the full burden to workers, regardless of who, in theory, quote, is assigned to pay.
Thank you.
Okay. Judith volunteered. Would anyone also like to pen a few lines? Okay. Thanks, Kathy. All right. We talked a little bit before about exemptions, but it reappears here. So this is B. Recommend to the actuary an exemption for small employers, 15 or fewer employees, for the low benefits model, but not for the high benefits model. So that total program cost on the low benefit model included an exemption for those employers with 15 or fewer employees. What discussion do we need on this? And I would question the relevance of it. So, Jared, make the point, please. You could get the microphone for that.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if this just is something that gets folded into the 5 folks who are writing that presume a shared contribution, because for the 8 folks who just voted, it would be irrelevant if it's 100% employee funded, because this is just about funding. So this would say in a shared contribution model, the smallest employers don't contribute, but that's not relevant to the now official recommendation that came right before.
Fair?
I see what you're saying, but I actually think they're slightly different points, because even under the 100% worker funded, you could still give some sort of reduction to workers and small businesses, right? You could do the exact same thing. If you were going to, under the shared contribution, take off the 50% that was the employer part, you could, on the 100% worker contribution, say, well, workers and small businesses only pay 50%. In a world in which there's full pass-through, those things are exactly equivalent, right? And so I actually think this is a separate point, which is effectively, do you think that workers in small businesses should pay a cheaper premium than workers in larger businesses? That's really what it comes down to, regardless of how it's shared or not.
Yeah, so that makes sense. It's just it's different than what we voted on. How
Well, that was, if you remember, we were getting down to the end of the meeting and we were just throwing stuff up at that point.
And I do 2 points on this, and that is that there is interesting information coming from the insurance community indicating that there are fewer family leave claims from employees of smaller businesses. Part of this is because of the more casual arrangements that small businesses make with their employers or employees, and that going through the bureaucratic process does not always fit into their particular operational model, and particularly for businesses that might be family businesses. And this came up when when we were talking about like small farms across Colorado, and so there is that potential to consider that in a very small business that even the employee should have the option of not paying this program if they actually have a lower level of use of the benefit.
Jared?
Yeah, so I mean, I think respectfully, I would push back on the finding. You know, I think a lot of the research shows less usage among employees in small businesses because there's more fear about taking the benefit without guaranteed job protection or adequate wage replacement. And there is research to that point. It was reflected in the expert reports. So I think there's certainly a difference of opinion. I would strongly push back that there's less need among employees of small business. You also see much less access to paid leave benefits among the smallest employees, often because it is hard to pay out of pocket, which is why a statewide social insurance pool actually helps small businesses that might not be able to pay it out of pocket. So the reasons why you see less usage often is reflected because there's less access to benefits, and when there are benefits, there's some fear of using them.
I am kind of interested in understanding where the evidence comes from, because I don't believe that the actual claims or you know the data coming out of the actual experience of the states has been available by size of employer. So I'm wondering if that comes from survey results, which can be very, very muddy, or whether it's actually from data.
Yeah, it comes from both access numbers under the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, who has access to the benefit, sure, as well as the surveys, including what Dr. Applebaum mentioned, did do based on size of business, pretty, extensively, and was documented on that piece as well.
Edwin?
Yes, Edwin, so assuming that the cost, as Karen has mentioned, is taken up by the employee, I'm not clear why the high benefit model does not support this, as low income minimum wage workers tend to disproportionately occupy the small business space. So this would effectively give those low income workers a discount on the premiums. So that's something I'd like for the high benefit model proposed to consider.
So am I correct in that we are at a point where, as written, this isn't super helpful, but there is an underlying question around subsidy for those workers in low income, small businesses? Do we need a different recommendation?
So I think, right, what you would have is a voting on a recommendation for a reduction in the total premium paid for workers in small businesses, regardless of split, right? That's really what this is about. So if we would be, and I'll just, to be specific, I will say a 50% reduction just to make it concrete. So this would be, again, I'm just clarifying the language, I'm gonna vote against this. But, right, the language would be a 50% reduction in total premium paid for workers and small businesses, regardless of split.
When you say regardless of split?
No, I was just gonna, sorry Stacey, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to acknowledge that the 50% mark is what the actuary used in his analysis, just for consistency's sake. Sorry Stacey, go ahead. Sorry.
So the idea would be, so for example, yeah, so I see your question, right? Again, none of this matters if you believe economics. So in the case where if he was 100% worker funded, it would just be cut in half for those workers. In the case where it was 50-50 worker and employer funded, Presumably it would be the 50%, that's the employers, how it's been done in other states. But I guess you're clarifying whether that would be like half off of each piece, or is,
Correct, because
right.
I think initially when I think I made this motion, I was looking for some, I guess, exemption for small employers, so that the small employer would not be.
Right.
I don't wanna lose, I don't wanna lose that
Mhm.
in, what we decide.
So, Tara, if, does that like create some, so if it's held at the employer level, right? The employer isn't changing, like it's not, it's rare that the employer is gonna go from 15 people to 20 people to 10 people, right? They're not bouncing around like that, but for the employee, they could easily work for CFI and then next year work for, Steamboat Resorts. And then, they could bounce around, and so does that create weird incentives for them to stay with a small employer or limit their portability or the equity of the payment?
So on portability has no effect, right? On incentives to stay with the smaller employer, yes, but that would be true regardless of whether you were doing this on the, on the employer-employee or portion or 50%. That would be true. Here's what I would like to recommend is that I think there's a general interest in the room in establishing whether there are people who want to have some sort of small business relief on the premium versus not. So how about we just do a general vote on that?
The hand vote?
On that, and then it's not clear to me whether we need to do all the wordsmithing in the room, like then that could get clarified within the two sort of written
Pay
pieces.
attention.
Huh?
I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
I think the words matter.
No, the words matter, but I think that I think we all have the same idea of what's going on. It's just exactly getting the writing right.
Okay.
Is
Well,
my
let's
opinion.
do it the way that you proposed though. Let's ask the question, just with a simple hand vote, and please leave your hands up. I gotta count across the room. Who is in favor of giving some relief to those working in small businesses? Show of hands. 1, 2. But
Okay, I'm sorry, what I said was a reduction, let's take away a reduction in total premium paid for workers working in small businesses. But to say that, just a reduction in total premium paid for workers in small businesses, and without specifying the exact details on that at this point.
I do want to make a clarification. I do want to make a clarification. This whole point came about when Stacy brought about addressing the concerns and the pressures of small business. And the way it's being kind of redirected to is workers in small business. Now, I fully understand and appreciate the academic side of it, of what Tara's talking about. But there's a very real, as a small business owner, and frankly, as an economic issue, is that when you're paying an employee at minimum wage, there's nothing else below that to negotiate downwards. We're at the bottom, we're at the floor. So the immediate effect on small businesses, if we do not provide them relief, is an increase in their operational cost. That cannot be passed down because the minimum wage of workers are already on the floor. So I think that's much more consistent with the original proposal that Stacy brought forth. And of course, I do recall me pushing back a little with Stacy about the need to test which small business gets this relief, because not to use law firms anymore, but
Are you gonna use someone else?
yeah, I'm gonna use someone else. Like, a small hedge fund, with five principals, do not need a discount or any kind of relief on that. But still, bringing back to the point is that the focus is about small businesses that do hire minimum wage workers, where they're at the floor, they can't go down anymore.
pass the mic to Trish, please, and to Tara.
A point of clarification, because I'm confused on the words that were just added. And it kind of goes to Edwin's comment. Does this assume it's for low-wage workers, or could it be any small business with high earnings workers? And that's where I'm confused.
Terry, you were gonna,
I'll wait.
Hadley, then Diana.
So to this point, because I've raised this question about the distributionary effect of these programs many times, and actually, I don't even know if Kevin remembers this, but Kevin mentioned that we could do like a two-tiered premium. You know, you could give a break on premium based on income level that would have nothing to do with the business size. But I think there's a separate concern, at least in my mind, that small businesses already face disproportionately high administrative burdens. It's difficult when you're starting, you're growing, and there's all types of, you know, compliance burdens that come with a program like this, the job protection piece. That's why I'm in favor of exemptions there. And so the tax relief, or the relief from the monetary cost of this program, I could see that taking shape in many different ways, not just a change to the premium level of employees within those small businesses, but you could offer a tax credit of some kind to small businesses as a part of a program like this to help them offset some of the other costs aside from premium costs. That's one option.
Well, and also, as Washington State does, they offer this, it's like a grant program for businesses, so they can apply if they need assistance with covering, HR needs, or, hiring a substitute worker and that kind of thing. So Hadley's right, there are a lot of other ways that we can structure that rather than just a premium reduction, across the board premium reduction for size of business.
So maybe if I turn that into a motion, it would be, I'm sorry, I know there's more discussion. I'll wait for the other discussion.
Okay, I see where you're going. I'd like to go ahead. Diana,
Yeah,
then Judith.
I mean, when we were talking about the potential of an employee discount for small businesses, I only meant to make a point that we need to recognize the fact that use rates do tend to go higher in larger companies, partly because of the nature of their human resources and absence management and education and a whole number of factors. But I do not want to lose sight of, to Stacy's point, the overriding concern, and that is the regressive nature of this whole policy on the smaller businesses in terms of their costs, in terms of operational disruption, training, labor markets are so different across Colorado. There's just so many points there to be made. And I am concerned when I hear proposals that say, okay, first you'll pay the premium, go through that compliance, and now you will apply for a grant through the state of Colorado, or through another compliance piece to get a grant to cover your costs. I mean, this is just, it's just, yeah. No,
Okay. So let's go with Judith. Pass back to Hadley then.
Sure, I was gonna make a motion. Trish, did you want the microphone? Okay. Just to move us along, because I think there's been a lot of good discussion on this point. And there might even be more common ground than we realize. I'm gonna take a cue from Jared and try to make a motion that is kind of generic and that would just recommend that the legislature consider various models for helping small businesses absorb the cost associated with premiums, compliance, or job protection.
Consider various.
It's very wide open. I welcome help on the wording, but this is sort of the direction I'm going in.
Hadley, in terms of being more consistent with the original intent of this piece, is how about if we state something to the effect, which would be consistent with that the small business is under a certain 15, and add some kind of qualifier to mean test the qualification.
Subject to
Yeah.
means testing.
Yeah, subject to mean testing will be, small business will be exempt from the 50% of the premium if, in the event that it is a employee-funded model, then that will be passed on to the employee, that discount.
I think the 50% discount model is one of the models that our legislature should consider if they don't go with our recommendation to make it 100% employee funded, right?
Yeah, so the way this would be basically tiered, that if it is if it's a share model, 50-50 share model, then small businesses would get the relief.
Right.
And then, but however.
As they
it's
do
not-
in some other states.
Correct, and
So-
if it is not.
So, some potential here. I think this explanation right here, needs to go away. I think consistent with how we've done it in the past, it's just parenthetical, e.g. tax break, exemption,
They can consider a grant program, although
grant program.
it may not be the best. We're asking
So,
them to consider.
I want
right?
to clarify that I don't think that this recommendation should go here because this is under the program funding structure. And so we're starting to talk about things that are not related to the program funding structure. So tax breaks.
But it could be, Judy, it could relate to the premiums, depending on how premiums are shared or not shared. That's why it's there.
The grant program is not related to the, so I think it just, again, it should be a separate recommendation. I think I'm not opposed to it. I just think that it's not under the program funding structure conversation and, because that's where we're at. And I think that's,
I guess the rationale for putting it here would be that when we talk about program funding, the suggestion behind this recommendation is that we're gonna ask less of small businesses when it comes to funding. In some way, we're gonna find a way to reduce their funding burden. So that's why it would be here, but if there's another part of the report that you think it would fit better, I'm all ears still, but thank you.
Diane?
And isn't it true that if there was a grant program, that would be funded out of the fund?
As would all payments made out of this program, I presume, right?
So this is consistent with what we've spoken before, where, like Jared's motion earlier, it is something where you offer some options to the legislature, but you stop short of saying, prescribing the exact method. Judith?
again, I just wanted to just clarify that, I think this recommendation again was sent to the actuary. And so we do have some parameters there. So again, I'm not opposed to looking into that. I just feel like it should be separate. That's, and again, because it's, grant programs, I think,
I think this would be, my motion would be to strike the black text that says recommend to the actuary, because that was what we sent to the actuary. That was, it's no longer relevant to our final recommendation. But my recommendation in place of that is to say, we ask the legislature to consider.
So we've got two
Okay.
different ways to do it, right? One is be prescriptive about reducing the total premium. Another is offset the costs borne by small businesses in an undetermined manner, which may include. Jared?
Yeah, so I'm not opposed to taking a vote. I don't think I would support this here, similar to some reasons for Judith, especially coming off of the last vote that had 8. And if it's helpful, I mean, my plan would be under the considerations for the previous to bear out both why there might be a shared employer-employee cost and how a discount could factor into that. So that's where I am.
I'm fine with that. I would prefer that we vote on the second of these two as they're listed, and even include under examples, a premium reduction could be one way that the legislature, I mean, it is. However, I also think we could leave that out and we could put the premium reduction discussion under rationale or concerns in the previous. I agree too.
And that kind of then would preclude us having to choose a number. Right.
We're just asking the legislature, right, consider it.
So do you all want to vote on that bold red text at the bottom of the screen has its own recommendation. If that fails, it would appear that the logical thing to do with it would be to nest it up under other considerations. Okay? Let's try. Campbell. Kevin, for your benefit, it reads, recommend the legislature consider various mechanisms to lower the burden, probably say cost burden, on small business. Yeah. Campbell? No?
I don't think it gets to the intent of what I originally was trying to do, but I also understand what we voted on before, that it's 100% employer funded. To go with that.
So it's a no, a yes.
I'm sorry, I'm interested in hearing more about Stacy's concern.
I think what we voted, what we voted on was it's going to be 100% employee funded. And what's that? So if they don't actually do that, then I would prefer to be back at the language, which is to exempt small employers from having to pay that benefit. So that's why I think this goes, for me, this doesn't go far enough.
Are we voting or are we back in discussion? Respectfully.
Let's go ahead and vote on the second piece. And so this is just saying that we recognize and we've discussed multiple times the challenges of small businesses, and we're encouraging the legislature to take that into consideration, right? So that's the intent, I think, of the language that we're hearing in the second bullet.
Stacy, under the examples where it says premium reduction, I think that the presumption, at least the presumption I'm making behind that is the premium reduction is what is listed above.
I agree with Stacy, they're different. I agree completely. And so I think we should just have two votes. I think we should vote on the top one, but actually make it more specific to Stacy's. In the case of a worker-employer split, small businesses should receive a break where they don't pay the employer portion. Vote on that directly, and vote on the second directly.
Tara, let's
An employer-employee split.
Small businesses, employer side, 0.
you want to say 0 or will be reduced?
I think we leave the employer side 0 matches.
Okay.
So you can take out.
In the case of an employer, employee, and then put slash between employer, employee, and we use the term worker historically for consistency. Okay. Small business. Employer side, well, small business. If your employee would be exempt from paying the employer side premium. Did I get at it? True statement?
Green is good, if anybody's wondering. Okay, so that helped me a lot on the first point. On the second point, where we've got examples listed and exemption is there, is that another way of saying that the state can then exempt smaller employers? Because really that, even though the top verbiage was sent to the actuary. I recall that was the discussion of, do you create an exemption for those marks? So when we say exemption on the second one, is it in essence similar to the first with just a lot less detail?
Say it again.
Yes.
The second is recommending they pursue some mechanism. Thank you. Let's vote on the first one. And Kevin, for your benefit, it reads, in the case of an employer-worker split, small businesses that has 15 or fewer employees would be exempt from paying the employer side premium. Clear to vote? Campbell?
Yes.
Duncan?
I'm sorry, did you say 15 or 50?
1 5 or fewer employees.
Yes.
Haygood?
Yes.
Make?
Yes.
Manning?
Yes.
Marquez? McKinnish?
No.
Parker Murray? Petrarch? We're gonna vote on the next one?
We'll vote separately.
Sullivan?
Yes.
Waligorski? White? Zoe?
Yes.
Okay. 10 yeses, 3 noes. Okay, let's vote on the next one. Kevin, that one reads, yes,
On the employer portion, on the employer. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I thought we were, I'm sorry, for some reason I thought we were talking about a reduction.
does it change your vote? Okay, can we change that? 9-4. Okay. And again, you could write if that carries, think it should be reduced but not exempt. Okay. Here we go. The second vote. Recommend the legislature consider various mechanisms to lower the cost burden on small businesses, e.g. tax break, exemption, grant program, premium reduction. Clear to vote?
So the idea we're all going to the opportunity to
Yeah, and I kind of feel like we're going to see a little bit of a tree here. We're going to say, depending upon the decisions that policymakers make, if they choose this, then they should consider. Okay. Campbell?
Yes.
Duncan?
I'm sorry, I need a point of clarification. Does exemption mean exemption from paying premiums for the small employer or exemption from the program?
Yeah.
Because
It's not clear.
that affects my vote too, so I don't know if
All right, well,
anyone
let's get
wants
some
to
clarity.
reconsider that. It's just saying exemption is a no-go for me.
So should we say premium exemption?
I thought it was always the premium exemption.
So, friendly amendment, add the word premium exemption. Kevin, is that clear enough?
Yes, thank you.
Karen?
I vote yes.
Okay, back to our string then. So we've got, Campbell, you were a, Duncan is a yes. Hey, good.
Yes.
Nate? Yes. Manning? Marquez? McKinnish?
Yes, but I would clarify that I think that each, they're all very different and they work differently, so I'm not sure how we're gonna write this.
Encourage you to participate in that process. McKinnish?
No.
Parker Murray?
Yes.
Petrarch? Sullivan?
Yes.
Waligorski? White? Zoe?
Yes.
11 yeses, 2 noes. All right, So we are afternoon. We have a calendared thing. I'm going to ask you guys to grab your lunch and return in 10 minutes because we have the Pinnacle folks here. They're going to give you 15, 20 minutes of presentation and then a similar amount for Q&A. Okay? We will start up again no later than 12:20.
I don't know. No, I'm not gonna. I didn't even think about that. It never even dawned.
within the next week. We understand that timing is not optimal. After all, we are going into Christmas week. At the same time, we also recognize that all of you will be working on your report over the course of the next few weeks. So we hope that you'll find that information valuable, and of course, we stand ready to answer any questions for you going forward. One last thing before I turn it over to Kathy to walk you through the memo. I'd like to address the elephant in the room today, which is the letter you all received from AFL-CIO yesterday. There are some significant misrepresentations of fact and some perhaps misunderstandings reflected in that memo. And I'd like to take just a couple of minutes to talk about facts and observations related to that. You see some allegations in that memo about Pinnacle on the workers' comp side. Ordinarily, I would not be taking the time to talk with all of you about workers' compensation since you are here after all the work on a family medical leave. But again, because these concerns were raised to you in your capacity as members of this task force, I thought it was important to address them. So you'll see allegations in there related to Pinnacle denying claims or attempting to force settlements or rushing injured workers back to work. I'd like to give you some facts about that. Our injured worker satisfaction scores, as reported to the Division of Workers' Compensation over the last 5 years, are the highest of all carriers in the state. We have received recognition from the Division of Workers' Compensation for our claims handling, specifically in terms of timely and accurate payments. We pay our claims 17% faster than any other carrier. Out of 44,000 claims Pinnacle received last year, we denied 3% of those. And the vast majority of those were because the injury was found not to be related to work. There is an inaccurate statement in that memo regarding Pinnacle's market share. It talks about 65% market share. At one time, I think that was true. Currently, we're at 57%. There's a particular allegation that Pinnacle, quote unquote, viciously fought all efforts at reform of the workers' compensation system. That is fundamentally untrue. For the last 10 years, Pinnacle has had an agreement with the representatives of the self-insured businesses, as well as the Workers' Compensation Education Association, and that is the group of trial attorneys who represent injured workers. So that each year we get together, we talk about potential legislation. There's an agreement among all three of those groups that no one of them will move forward with legislation if all three do not agree. I have here a list of 27 improvements to the workers' compensation process and benefits over the last 10 years that have been negotiated by Pinnacle with those workers' comp claimant attorneys. 4 years ago, we tried to embark upon a comprehensive study of the workers' compensation system because it was clear to us that there were disagreements among representatives of the business community and worker advocates about how well, in fact, the system was working. And we hired Greg Bellomo to facilitate that work for us. Ultimately, the business groups and the labor unions could not agree on the parameters of that study, but I think that demonstrates Pinnacle's good faith at attempting to do everything we can to understand and ensure a well-functioning workers' compensation system. There are characterizations in that memo regarding profit-taking behavior on the part of Pinnacle. I would just observe that we are a not-for-profit mutual insurance company. Ordinarily, we hear people advocating for nonprofit insurance carriers rather than against them. There are concerns raised by the AFL-CIO about whether or not Pinnacle would keep injured worker records separated from those in the paid family and medical leave system, and concerns that data from one would be used to inform claims determinations in the other. We addressed that point in the memo that you have before you, but let me simply say that if this proposal were to move forward and Pinnacle were allowed to participate, we would establish a separate sister company through which to administer this benefit. That would have separate computer systems, and there would be no reason or need to share data between those two systems. Finally, the memo appears to find fault with our efforts to be responsive to concerns that all of you raised regarding our risk rating approach as originally presented to you back in October when our consultant from Aon came in and had talked about doing risk rating at the level of the individual employer. You had expressed some very real and understandable concerns about potential impacts of risk rating in that way. We responded to those concerns by coming up with another approach to doing that. We understand that there are still concerns that some industries have a higher risk for this than other industries do. That is simply a fact, and any PFML system, whether it is run by the state or by private entities, will see great challenges if it does not acknowledge that fact. So with that, I'm going to stop speaking about the issue we're not here to talk about today and turn it over to Kathy to talk you through our memo.
Thank you. So I'm going to hit the highlights of this memo, assuming that you have not had time to look at it in advance. Starting on the first page, just addressing the question of why we don't have our actuarial analysis available to discuss with you today. We did commission it around the same time that you commissioned yours. We wanted to make sure that our parameters were similar to yours. We made some deliberate choices and a few differences, which we'll get to, but we did want to make sure that we were at least in the ballpark of what the task force was looking at. The reason for the longer length of time to prepare it is really, it has to look at these industry differences by demographics. We also are using primary data rather than using the secondary data otherwise commissioned by the task force that your actuary used. And then we are also looking at employer size. We had heard that employer size might be a significant determination of rates in this system, so that was another thing we asked the actuary to differentiate in his analysis. We did get a report on Friday. We are going through it now. We are close to being comfortable with the claim cost. We still have some work to do on layering on the other parts of the pricing. We are, again, hopefully very, very close on the claim side. And again, within a week, we anticipate that we'll be able to release a report containing both sets of data, both claims and pricing data. Let's see. Going to this next page of the memo. We did hire an external actuary, Milliman. We used a group of theirs in Portland, Maine that has experience in short-term disability and paid family leave markets. We did use parameters largely the same as the task force. The one exception I wanted to point out is the wage replacement approach for the low benefit model. In discussions we had with Aon, our consultant on this, they said that the benefit model wage replacement approach that the task force was using looked to be on the higher side of the different models they had seen across the country. And they said, you know, given that we're recommending a core benefit with that you could do buy-ups on, it seemed to make sense to have our low benefit model have a slightly lower version of the wage replacement. So we did make a decision to go with a different lower wage replacement model in our low option. Moving on, and I'll get to some of these parameters on a subsequent page, but moving on to page 3, we are looking at projected claim costs for both family leave and medical leave. We're looking at them separately and developing them separately. The analysis of the family leave claim costs is dependent primarily on data from California, Rhode Island, New York, and New Jersey. The New Jersey data seems to be an outlier, and so for the most part that has been removed from what the actuary is looking at. He looked at it, recognized that it's an outlier from the other 3 states, and is primarily leaving it out of his analysis at this point in time. On the projected medical leave side, New Jersey. And you'll see that in our report. You'll see the initial results from New Jersey and the fact that they're pretty far off from the other 3 states. Projected medical leave, instead of using one of the state-run programs, because medical leave is so similar to short-term disability and there is a lot of data on it, the insurance product of short-term disability, the actuary is using standard insurance industry information on short-term disability benefits to build his analysis on that side. And then again, we are looking at claim costs by industry sector separately, both for medical leave and for family leave. we have a list here of the industry sectors. They are based on SIC codes. They are 13 broad sectors. With the data we have today, that's about as detailed as we feel comfortable going. It's not to say it couldn't become more detailed in the future, but right now, even this is a stretch given the limited data available. But we felt like there was sufficient data on the demographics in these industries that we were then able to use to project what the costs would be based on what we know about demographics influencing claims in both the family leave and the medical leave side. In addition to developing those claim costs by industry sector, the things that we're layering on top of that to get to our pricing are administrative costs. We're using sort of some insurance industry typical administrative costs. We're looking at adding in things like commissions to brokers that might be part of the system, taxes, because we anticipate that we and others participating in here would be taxable entities, and other miscellaneous costs that fall into that. The other big thing we're looking at is how big does our risk fund need to be? I know that you, as part of yours, developed a risk fund that you felt like was necessary. Insurance companies have a very similar concept. We don't need to build ours up ahead of time necessarily, but we need to get enough out of the premiums to build up that risk fund over time. And that, all those added together will give us the pricing that we anticipate having within this week. Moving on to page 4. We did do a quick look at the difference between our analysis and the task force actuary report. So I'm just going to walk through these quickly. The first question we had, and this is a pretty significant one, so I wanted to make sure to highlight it. We are in the process of trying to estimate and build startup costs into our premium structure. We were very unclear looking at the task force actuaries report if they included any startup costs in that. It was never clearly said that there were startup costs in there, so we're assuming there's not. Okay, so there's not in there. So we are building that into our premium rates, and that will be a material difference between the two. Waiting period, because a 7-day waiting period is pretty standard on short-term disability, and we're using short-term disability to develop the medical costs, we did put a 7-day waiting period in there for medical leaves, but 0 days for family leaves. The wage replacement formula, we talked about that one already, so I won't harp on that one. I noticed a typo on the benefit cap. I had said that there was none in there for the task force. That's not true. During your discussion today, I went and looked at the actuarial report, and they used a 95% average weekly wage in both benefit models. We obviously differentiated to go along with our differential in the benefit wage replacement. We'll fix that in the final report. I apologize. Earning thresholds, we didn't have any in there. I don't think that's probably a material factor. Those small earnings probably are not going to make a significant difference in the premium numbers we come up with. Cap on premium collections, we are building into our model caps on premium collections the same as the task force. Small businesses, we did not model any exemptions. I know that you have not also suggested actually exempting any claim costs. You're just talking about potentially exempting premium. So from our perspective, we did not model anything like that. We will probably, after this report is issued, do some modeling on what the impact of feasibility to an insurance company would be of having smaller businesses be exempted, just to know whether it's going to impact the feasibility of a private market solution. Large businesses, we are building into our model some assumptions around self-insurance and the fact that some of the larger businesses will probably choose to self-insure and therefore not participate in the private market system. I believe there might have been a very, very, very small amount in your actuarial report, but it was so small as to not really be a factor. The utilization rate trend, our actuary actually is just building first year costs for us, and then we are modeling increases in costs over the years. So we can use your utilization rate. We will probably also do a model of a higher utilization rate, so we have 2 different versions of it to look at. And then commissions and taxes obviously included in ours and not in yours for fairly obvious reasons. We have comments on a couple other issues not related to the actuarial report if you go on to the next page. We did, as Edie say, adjust our approach to demographic information and suggested, based on the concerns around discrimination at the employer level, talk with some other folks in the industry, some actuaries, to get comfortable with the fact that we felt like using an industry approach was probably feasible and gets the insurance companies enough in the ballpark for pricing that you are still getting an adequate price for your risk if you use industry models to model the demographics. It doesn't mean all underwriting would be done at the industry level, just specific to the age and gender demographics. A good example of something that would be a significant underwriting factor that would be at the individual employer level still is the size of the business. Our actuary has said that in the family leave, he has seen a significant difference between large business utilization and small business utilization. He's built some of that in on the small business side. He hasn't been quite as aggressive as he probably could be. He said just anecdotally what he has seen is somewhere between 10 to 20% less than the average for your smallest businesses on family utilization. There is a slight difference on the disability side as well, but it's very less significant. It's nowhere in that 10% or higher ballpark. And then he also said large businesses tend to have a 10% higher utilization on family leave as well. Let's see. Carrier participation, I know that's come up a couple of times. What we can tell you is that our consultants, Aon, went out to 4 different national carriers in the space, in the short-term disability space, and they were all very interested in the product. They are, of course, concerned about the lack of data available to price the product, at least on the front end, but certainly expressed interest in getting involved in this type of market, particularly if there's a mandate to purchase it for employers. The other things we would point to around carrier participation is that there are carriers like Arch Insurance launching products in states that do have opt-out provisions. There are 20 carriers offering the product in New York today, and the American Council of Life Insurers and Matrix Absence Management sent memos to this task force saying that their industries would be very involved in a private market solution to this. And then I won't address the last one because I know Edie already did, so I think we can move on to questions. Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Edie, for all of the work that you've been doing through this busy holiday season to get us information. I just wanted to clarify, and we've talked before, so I just want to, I have a lot of numbers and information running through my head. And I just wanted to make sure that when we're talking about the difference in utilization between small businesses and large businesses, that is for small businesses defined as like 50 employees and up. Right? So their analysis didn't really get at sort of a micro business or some of the smaller businesses that like Edwin has been very concerned about. So so we don't know, again, it's unsure like what the difference in utilization would be. So I just wanted to make sure that that's correct, yes?
Yes, what they are telling, the actuaries have said they don't have any differentiation in the data 50 and below. So they've grouped everything 50 and below into one category because there is no data differentiation in that group.
And did they give any indication of why they think those differences are in utilization? I mean, at first, I at first thought, well, it's because of job protection, right? So people who are job protected are more likely to be able to use a benefit. And those employers with 50 or more qualify for the FMLA for unpaid job protected. But if that's not the case, then did they give you any indication of like why larger businesses would see a higher utilization for family leave purposes, or is it?
From their perspective, they can only speculate. They're seeing the numbers, not the rationale, of course, of individuals. The one thing I have heard, and again, this may be the reason, it may not be the reason, but that there's just more support at a large organization, more people to cover if someone goes out on leave, so employees may feel more comfortable doing so. But that is the only thing that I've heard from that perspective.
And are those big employers, I'm also thinking about kind, like are they government employers and multinational corporations where you may have like a culture change for some of the larger organizations that work like across the Canadian and US borders, so.
I don't know the answer to that one, sorry.
Okay, thanks very much, I appreciate you.
Hi, Patty. So I just wanted to understand, we had a conversation recently on the phone, so I apologize to everyone that I'm referencing a conversation not everyone heard. I just want to understand any differences between this and what we talked about on the phone.
So the one big thing that's unclear to me from reading this compared to the talk on the phone, because here it says that it's anticipated that industry demographics and employer size are the largest drivers of pricing differences in a private market model, and the whole document basically references just those two things as affecting prices. And we had on the phone talked, and there was an understanding that most likely you would be pricing also based on the actual wage distribution of the individual firm, like what fraction qualified for like 90% wage replacement versus like 60% wage replacement versus 40% wage replacement. So is the original phone conversation still correct, or is this document saying that something different than what's on the phone?
No, so I think we're saying the same thing, I just didn't express it the right way. So yes, the wage replacement, the actual demographics of the wages within a company would be part of the underwriting factor. It's not part of our actuarial report because you're not actually underwriting. We're not trying to develop a rate particularly for that. The rate would sort of be applied to all eligible wages, but of course you would cap eligible wages at some level.
Okay, well that makes sense, because really for the actuarial analysis, you're just trying to come up with essentially the utilization.
Yes.
The actuarial is that's what you're trying to do for that piece, and then once you do that, the wage replacement is just kind of a given. So that's what you're saying.
That's correct.
Okay, so I just want to say that I see a big difference between my understanding on our conversation on the phone and what I see in this document. Because if I were to read this document without having had the phone conversation with you, I would come away with a very different perspective on what would happen in the private market. Because what I see in this document is just 13 industries, and the idea that basically pricing would happen based on just these 13 aggregate industries and employer size, and basically that's it. And if that were true, then many of the concerns, right, that we might have would be deeply minimized in terms of these issues of redistribution versus essentially firms with low wage workers having to pay a higher premium because of the higher wage replacement, because of differences in demographics. Whereas on the phone, what I took away from our conversation on the phone was something very different, which was two things. One is you were starting with 13 industries because you just don't have the data, but over time that would devolve to smaller and smaller industries as you got better data to differentiate among industries. And that you would also then price to the individual firm based on the wage replacement that their workers were eligible for. So the degree of price differences across employer, I think, would be much greater in reality if I understand from the phone conversation than what I see in this document, which suggests something very aggregate.
It may, this was not a comprehensive document, it was just trying to address certain things, so those are great questions. It is in the table on page 4 that we would be doing the cap on the wages, but I think your point is clear that...
I'm sorry, just to be clear, the cap is a different issue, right? The issue is the wage replacement formula, right, is highly, the one, at least the one that the task force has proposed is highly progressive, right?
Yes.
So it has about 90% wage replacement for some workers, and other workers
and
will
so
get
if you have all lower income workers that would potentially get a higher wage, they would potentially have a higher premium. That is
correct. So if you have two employers that are basically rated as having the same risk of usage of their workers, but one has mostly low wage workers that qualify for 90% wage replacement, and the other firm has mostly workers that say qualify for like 50% wage replacement, the difference in premiums charged to those two employers would actually be quite substantial.
It could definitely be substantial. That's correct. And we'll make sure that's addressed in the final report. Thank you for bringing it up.
Hi, Jared.
Hi, Jared.
Yeah, thank you both for all of this information. And Edie, I don't know if I misunderstood what you were saying, but suggesting that regardless of the model of a program, that there's going to be some problems around risk rating. I don't quite know how to square with the fact that there are state social insurance programs that have established community rating that are doing very well. So there is a fundamental difference between the models that currently exist that are statewide pools with community rating where it is a flat charge versus this. So there are ways around that. Apart from, and thank you, Tara, for raising those points on these other considerations in terms of some of the costs, I remain deeply concerned with even the industry approach. you know, and putting aside still some concern that, you know, what Pinnacle is saying is also that this is probable, you know, it's probably something that could work, that there still is a lack of certainty, raises a bit of a concern. But even apart from that, we see significant segregation in terms of occupations by gender in particular. So even looking at these categories, there's going to be pretty significant implications on cost, and for me that raises equality issues that we don't see in the social insurance programs. You know, the U.S. Department of Labor very recently put out information that showed that 40% of women work in occupations where women make up at least 3/4, 75% of the workforce. And working moms are employed, a quarter of working moms are employed in just 3 industries. I mean, there's significant grouping, and looking at these industries, you know, education is somewhere around 80% female, healthcare is also a very female-dominated industry, and you tend to also see that going along with lower wages. I mean, it's one of many reasons there's a pay gap. But essentially that means lower wage women are likely, based on industry and industry segregation by gender, are going to be paying more. And so that is a deep concern with me. But you'll also see it on the flip side. Construction is 98% male, and you tend to see a greater need for medical leave. So you're going to see much higher rates there. You know, these are issues that in a social insurance program, as we've seen around the country, are not an issue with a large pool that's community rated. So, you know, I appreciate that you've acknowledged the discrimination concerns with the employer-specific risk rating, but there's still deep concerns for me in terms of equality with a model like this that we haven't seen elsewhere.
So, Jared, thank you for that, and I think that we'll be able to have a more informed discussion about that once we actually get the analysis and see the differences among those industry sectors.
The one thing I was going to add is that regardless of if you do go ahead with a community model, there will be obviously subsidization. That's one of the points of it. But this actuarial report will give you a good feel for what the degree of that subsidization is, which I think will be helpful information regardless of what direction you go.
Next question. When you first started talking, you were talking about maximum benefit period, I believe, and you said that your actuary thought that the task force's program was higher, or on the higher side. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
It actually wasn't our actuary, it was our consultants, Aon, who do a lot of work in the short-term disability space and in the paid family leave, paying attention to what's going on across the country. They said with the other state programs that they've seen, that the wage replacement formula that you used is on the higher side of what they've seen. There's a range. It's not that it's out of whack with the range, it's just seemed to be on the high side. You use in both a low model and a high model. They suggested that we use something lower in the low model. Judith.
Just to Jared's point, would community rating work under your model?
It will not work under a private market model. Let me lay out the reasons why. If you have a carrier of last resort like Pinnacle and then other private carriers that are allowed to say no to businesses when they come to them asking to be underwritten, and you set a average range. So let's just use the 0.71% that was the low option from your actuary in the first year. Let's say that's the range, that's the rate everybody charged, no matter what. What the private carriers that are not the carrier of last resort will do is only accept anybody that they think will cost 0.71 or less. So they will only take those folks, and the other half of the folks will get rejected by the rest of the industry, end up at Pinnacle's door. Pinnacle would only be able to charge them 0.71, but all of their risk would be higher than that. We would quickly go out of business. It's just not going to work. And if you were to require, on the other hand, all carriers to take all comers and not be able to say no, that's where you're going to get people choosing not to participate in the program, and you won't be able to attract private market carriers. The other side, yeah. It is what New York, I think, is trying to do, and they're only a year in, so I think the jury's still out on that. I just expect, they already had a built-in market and we don't have that in Colorado. I just don't think you'll attract carriers.
Just like a practical implementation question. Sorry, about the Pinnacle approach. If I'm an employee, how does this, is this reflected, or my premium rates reflected in my paycheck?
I believe so. I believe it would be kind of like a health insurance deduction out of a paycheck, where the employer would basically be the collector of the premium, and they would send it on to the insurance company.
Still taxable income?
I don't know the answer to that.
Could be set up a couple of different ways.
Okay, thank you.
So, Sandra Parker Murray, Communication Workers of America. You addressed the letter that was sent by AFL, and I just wanted to say, I know you quoted the statistics that show the minimal percentage of people who claims may have been denied to, but our members are people, and they're not statistics. They're a person, and what happens to them is personal. So every day we see that, and we are in the workplace fighting for those people and policing our collective bargaining agreement and making sure they are treated fairly. So to say that there have been significant opposition because there have been so many people who have been abused, they feel like have been abused by the way this company has handled working comp claims. So therefore, I am just standing for label here at this table to say that the letter that they wrote has a lot of valid points in it, because they're things that we see every day, and they're personal. They're not just a bunch of numbers. So just wanted to say that.
So Sandra, thank you for saying that, and I agree with you. It is about the people. It isn't about the numbers, and that is why I made the point about our injured worker satisfaction scores. And let me talk a little bit more about what that means. According to Colorado law, carriers are required to survey injured workers within a certain period of time after their claim has been closed or paid on their experience with their carrier. And then every workers' comp carrier must then report that data to the Division of Workers' Compensation. Every carrier is required to ask exactly the same questions. Those questions are written in the statute. And when we look at the comparison of the scores among all the carriers, all the top carriers in Colorado, Pinnacle is consistently at the top. And that is because we agree with you. These are people. They're not numbers. And we treat our injured workers as people. Now, I'm not going to say that every injured worker is thrilled with their experience, particularly if somebody's claim was denied. We get that. But I think you will see that we are much more focused on taking care of the people than other carriers in this market, because we're a homegrown company. The others are not.
Lydia, and thank you so much. It's nice to meet you in person, Kathy. I was part of that phone call on Friday with Tara, and thank you so much for that explanation. You guys have done a tremendous amount of work and have really tried to help us understand the differences between these two models, and I'm really appreciative of that. I think for me, when we talked on the phone Friday, in terms of like once we had data, this would go down in terms of really individualizing things at the personal level, and so my entire family is either healthcare or military across the board, and so I'm really struggling with the fact that once that happens, that they would pay more. And those are kind of the folks that really couldn't afford to pay more, knowing what we pay our paramedics and folks here in Colorado. So, is there? Do we know that and granted that premiums would increase over time, with just inflation too, and so is there a time frame that you have in mind in terms of when we go from those 13 to those more intricate calculations? Detailed industries. Thank
There
you,
you
Tara.
go.
Thank you.
No, I don't have anything in mind. I think it would be when we would look at doing it potentially when there was data to support it, which obviously would take probably 3-4 years. Let me also be clear, that will work within the confines of whatever regulatory system is available. There could be a regulatory system that says you cannot underwrite any more detailed level than gender and age demographics at this 13 industry level. I never want to suggest more regulation rather than less, and accountants and actuaries would always rather be able to use more data and differentiate on more factors, but just because that's what we want doesn't mean that's what we have to have. The more you allow us to differentiate, the more carriers you're going to have interested in doing this, the more robust the private market would be. But if you can strike a decent balance between letting us have enough to be able to get risk-based underwriting and still take away some of the things you find more problematic, it probably can work. But it's just a balancing act, and it's hard to say where the bright line in the sand is.
So I have a question. As we are kind of ending our work here, and we're tasked with putting together a final report, and I think from what I've seen, the governor is wanting us to include a private market option. And so just at a high level, I mean, I know we get into the details, I know the letter, and I appreciate kind of seeing what you bring I know there's a lot out there. Help me to understand, you know, from a high level, what would be the top 3 or 4 things that you think a private market could do better than the program that we've been talking about?
The first one I would point out is customer service. Generally speaking, insurance companies compete on 2 things. One is price, and we'll get to that one in a second. But customer service would be the other one, particularly with a mandated benefit like work comp, like this, what we're talking about. You're not competing based on giving just a little bit more coverage here or just a little bit more coverage there. You're competing based on how well you serve both the employers and the employees of Colorado. If you are taking good care of them, they're going to want to sign back up with you, even if your price is the same as or higher than someone else next to you. I'm not saying that Colorado's governmental services are bad. We've seen examples in some other states of bad service, but I also don't think you get the same level of service as you can get potentially with private insurance. Price would be the other one. I don't think there will be huge price differences at the beginning. I think the cost of claims is just this huge unknown, and it's going to be the same in either version of this. The cost of claims really should not differ. Where you're going to see the differences is going to be in the rest of the cost structure, administration. And I think what you find in the private market is that over time, competition should drive out any inefficiencies in the system, and it's just harder to do that in a government model. So I think over time you will see price differentials overall on average in the system. I understand the difference between community rating and risk-based rating. It's just 2 completely different philosophical approaches. But we will also, in a risk-based system, be able to show people where the risk really is. It won't be hidden. It will be very available, and people will be able to see it. Anything you would add? Okay. So those are the main things I would bring up.
And you said you're doing an actual report, you have one back. Is that something that you're intending to share with the task force?
Yes, we can't share the report itself. We can share some of the exhibits from the report. Our actuary said that you're not allowed to release it publicly. We can release their exhibits, and then we can summarize the work that they did. So we also, of course, I said that they did the claim cost side of it for us, and then we're adding on our own other pricing considerations. So it will be a report that sort of pulls those 2 things together into one report, and we will share those details.
We'll have that in the next week or so.
Okay, that's what I'm
Yes. Yes.
Because we have a deadline.
Yes. Exactly.
Question?
Pardon, I have a question.
Go ahead, Kevin.
You're recommending a plan that would be funded by employees, but whoever selected the program would be the employers. Is that what you're envisioning with your private market alternative?
Yeah, I believe that's the way it would probably work. It's the way it works for most other benefits that are provided by the employer, with health insurance being a prime example.
All right, but in this case, employees are paying for it, but then the employer negotiates with you over what the plan would be like.
Correct.
And my other question has to do, you mentioned that with a differentiated, premium, policy, you'd have more private carriers interested in providing insurance. What is your estimate of the number of those insurers that would be from out of state? I think in the past, we talked about John Hancock, but, with that, do you anticipate this being attractive enough to, for national insurance companies from other states?
Yes, so the.
Obviously,
Go ahead, Kevin.
Pinnacle would not serve the whole market.
That's correct. We think it would be a failure if Pinnacle did end up serving the whole market. That is not our goal. The entire point of this is to have a healthy, competitive market. We, again, had our Aon, our consultants, go out and talk to some 4 national carriers in this space that said they would be interested in doing it. My gut reaction is that people are going to be slow to enter. They're going to want to see the data before they get in. I wouldn't be surprised if Pinnacle wouldn't have a large market share in the first couple of years as it was sort of getting on its feet. Hopefully not 100%. I don't want it. Because I think the competitive market is the way this works in the long term. But I do think that as the data becomes available, and the good news is the data becomes available on a short-term product like this very quickly, in a couple of years, you'd have great data, and there would be a reason for the carriers not to enter this space. Those national carriers are providing short-term disability to Colorado employers today.
I was just going to clarify that with the employer mandate, the legislation would require employers to provide this coverage for their employees and set parameters, minimums, and maximums of that coverage based on whatever recommendations we have forward. So that's the difference. And I think I've heard from industry associations that more and more of those coalition associations are talking about getting into this nationwide.
Right.
And Joe, thank you very much for that clarification, because I also wanted to make that in response to Kevin's question. He said something about the employer negotiating the plan. The benefits of the plan, the core benefits, would be set in statute. Of course, if there were to be any buy-up, employers and employees would determine that between them.
So let's go ahead and take 2 more questions so that we stay on. Tara?
So this is to bring it, sort of this discussion kind of full circle around, and kind of also what we discussed on the phone. The way the way I think about this now, right, is that the main benefits of this model come from when you do have a healthy market with multiple providers competing, right? But in order for you to have a market that is attractive, to have a bunch of providers come in and compete, you need to allow a good bit of risk differentiation, basically, of being able to price down to a fairly disaggregate level. Is that great? So this involves both in terms of detailed industry, and also, like I said, being able to price down to the wage composition of individual firms. As we move towards more aggregate pricing, be that in more aggregate industries, or not allowing pricing to be done at the individual firm level based on wage composition, my understanding is that the concern should be that once you do that, that's going to become much less attractive for other providers to come in. Can Pinnacle give any, I realize this is pure speculation, but would Pinnacle be able to give any idea of what level of aggregation disaggregation you think you need in order to have this multiple providers? Because my sense is that this is where the big problem is, that once you get up to the level of aggregation you need to avoid the problems on the pricing side from sort of equity standpoint, that the chances you attract multiple providers is really low. Do you have any sort of feedback on that?
It depends. If you were to not put any restrictions on any other part of the underwriting, I think you might be able to get away with these 13 categories.
But by no other restrictions, you mean still be able to price to the wage composition of individual employers.
Exactly.
Right.
I think
the low wage versus the high wage.
Again, it's a puzzle, and if you let them go a little bit more detailed on the industries, then maybe you can start putting some restrictions in some other areas. But the more restrictions you put in, eventually it overweights the system, basically.
So let's go with Judith, then we'll give last word to Diane.
I have a question around cost. So where will you see like cost cutting? I think you talked about administration, that there would be a lot less. So yeah, just kind of where would you see cost cutting in order to, that it makes maybe a little bit cheaper than running it through a social insurance program?
Yeah, it usually comes in the administrative costs, so things like building in system efficiencies, figuring out ways to automate parts of the process, that kind of thing.
Okay, and then also my follow-up is around, just with the letter from AFL-CIO, it talks about, for example, I think, my first question is, it talks about that, is Pinnacle tax exempt as a company?
Yes, Pinnacle is, but this probably would not be administered by Pinnacle, it would be administered by a sister company that would be taxable.
And then what would be the cost to set up a sister company?
I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but they'd be included in the startup costs that we're building into this.
Okay.
We've set up a subsidiary already. The legal costs of setting up another company are not very big. Yeah.
But then there's still, the Department of Labor would still need to be a regulatory body, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and then also.
And the Division of Insurance.
Yes.
Oh, and then also, because I think that in the examples, and I think that to highlight what Sandra was saying about, can you say as a company that some claims are not denied? For example, the way that they think Pinnacle has said is that there's situations where the claims are denied, but also sometimes the benefit is reduced. Like, does that happen? I'm honestly asking. I'm like, this is all kind of new to me.
I'm not sure I understand the
Yes.
question. I've never heard about a
Yes,
claim
it's
being denied and a benefit being simultaneously reduced.
Oh yeah, it just those are the examples that they give, that sometimes claims are denied, or the company can try to reduce the benefit that they are.
Okay, so yeah, so this wouldn't happen simultaneously, but these are different things. And as I indicated earlier, sometimes claims are denied. As I said, 3% of our 44,000 claims in the last year were denied, generally because the injury was found not to have been work-related. There are occasions in which benefits can be reduced, and that is according to statutory guidelines. So there are things written into the statute.
And then just my last follow-up question. So, I think it's just surprising to me. I didn't realize that Pinnacle was a tax exempt company. So that's interesting. And I think that also in regards to the letter that AFL-CIO sent, was that there will be reserves, correct, in like the fund, because you need it for it to be solvent, right?
Sure. Correct.
And then also, does Pinnacle invest those, additional funds?
Pinnacle today does, as it collects premiums up front and has a risk fund that it holds, it invests those in the investment markets today to be able to get a return that then goes back to our policyholders, typically as dividends.
A couple of other thoughts about that. So setting up this sister company to provide the PFML benefit, that would be just another investment of our existing funds. Then you were talking about Pinnacle itself being tax exempt. We get that tax exemption from the federal government in exchange for accepting all comers being the carrier of last resort in the workers' comp space. That is federal law.
And then, so again, so there definitely can be like further additional funds, so there will definitely be investments, and then there will definitely, if there's additional funds, there will be dividends provided to the shareholder, correct?
Correct. We do think that this line of business is so much shorter tail, meaning that the claims settle and are done very fast compared to work comp, that the investment possibilities will be much less in this type of company. You will be able to invest in much shorter term investments and therefore get lower returns, generally speaking, for this company, but it would still potentially drive dividends to the policyholders.
And so those dividends, basically, it's like the surplus, and so it is profit basically for the shareholders.
What you can look at it as, if you look at it as the risk fund, if we have more money in the risk fund than we need, then you can give it back to the shareholders.
But But let's be very clear, this is not shareholders, this is not a corporation, these are policyholders. Pinnacle today is a mutual insurance company, the sister company that we would propose setting up for paid family medical leave would also be a mutual. And what that means is the company is owned by its policyholders, and any surplus that is dividended, that is in excess of what is needed to cover, to be our rainy day fund, is dividended back to those policyholders. Pinnacle has provided dividends to our policyholders for the last 5 years. Our board just voted its intent to release another general dividend next year. So again, this is not about shareholders, this is about the people who own the policies.
Diana, last word.
I think it would be fairly quick. Presumably, the reason why we would consider this is that it would be much less disruptive to existing benefits, and aside from the other factors like price containment and service, but as opposed to doing it standalone through a state-run program. And Kathy, you had mentioned we think about this a little bit in terms of how is this different, how it is the same as workers' comp, and try to get my head around this. And when I think of workers' comp, I think of it as being a fairly standalone benefit. It does, touch other programs, but paid family medical leave, as this is proposed, is the core and buy-up. So I see this as creating more incentives for other carriers to enter this market. I just because it's a more integrated benefit, and I would hope that you would see those carriers come in sooner, because otherwise they risk losing those other peripheral integrated benefits.
Yes.
Is that the sense? Yes.
That's certainly the hope. So I think in particular the benefits that you'd see, long-term disability, those types of benefits would typically, you'd want to have them all managed by one carrier. So we do hope that that will help lead to bringing people into the marketplace. There's probably a lot of national carriers today providing short-term, long-term disability to at least the larger employers of Colorado. Those people probably aren't going to want to risk losing some of that business to Pinnacle. They're going to want to come in and offer this product, at least to those employers that already purchase a long-term or a short-term disability benefit today.
Right, and also, this has 3 pieces to it. So like, for example, bonding, a lot of employers would place that at 100%. So this would, I just see that as pulling in more competition.
And Diana, I'm very glad you raised that point, because I think it's an important response to the concern that Tara raised earlier. Is the only way to get more carriers in the market to disaggregate the industries at such a fine level. But the thing that's going to appeal to carriers about participating in this market is the ability to bundle their products. The ability for those national life and disability carriers to come in and not only offer that disability coverage and that life insurance coverage, but then tack this onto it. So.
All right. On behalf of the task force, thanks to Kathy and Edie.
I really appreciate the time.
All right, everybody. So what do you say we charge on for half hour, 45 minutes, and then we'll take another break? Good with that?
Can we verify everyone got their payments? Or?
Lydia, resume her chair. Okay, so right before the break, we had gotten agreement. Okay, so we got agreement to 2 adjustments, or 2 additional recommendations that would be related to how we might promote or propose managing the potential risk on small businesses. Okay? We did not get an agreement on who would write the recommendation and the minority opinions. So let's go with this first one. This is the exemption. In the case of a worker-employee split, small businesses would be exempt from paying the employer portion. Who'd like to write the recommendation on that one? Diana? Work together on both of them? Or sorry? Oh, I see. Okay. How about minority opinions on the exemption idea? Do we need any? We had some no's. So for refresh, I'm meaning this one here. All right, let's go to this next one then. This is the intentionally more vague suggestion that the legislature consider additional mechanisms. Who wants to write the majority on that? Diana again, thank you. Any minority opinions on that one? Judith, you had a bit of heartburn on where it was located. Okay. Kathy?
I didn't know that we were in charge of all of them, so I'll just say I'll take care of it.
All right, thank you all. Give you a second. All right, Daniel, thank you for rolling out. Here we are. This is segment 9 or element 9, program fund structure, part C. Motion to collect paid family and medical leave premiums up to the set wages of $90,000 for the low benefit model and the current Social Security wage base of $132,900 for the high benefits model. That was voted unanimously to be the set of parameters that you shipped to the actuary. Do you all want to go with a middle of the road number, either of those numbers, or would you like to do as we've done in the past, simply say, here's the rationale for the lower number, here's the rationale for the higher number? Dr. Tara.
So I don't know if there's going to be interest in a middle of the road number, but I'll throw one out
Okay.
and give you my rationale and try to put that to a relatively quick vote. And if it just defaults back to the 2, that's fine. But here's what I came up with as a middle of the road number. The original high benefit model was based on the Social Security cap on taxable earnings. If you take 80%, of the cap on the current cap on Social Security cap, taxable earnings, you get a little over $106,000. The reason why if you take that and you look at what someone with that level of income with $106,000 in annual earnings would be eligible for, they would get under this program 50% wage replacement. Right, so the idea there is if you tax up to 80% of the Social Security cap, which the nice thing about that is it's tagged to a federally set thing, and everyone knows it and it's adjusted. Then you would you already have quite a lot of redistribution because anyone earning up to that $106,000, all of them would be paying the same rate in. All of them would be paying the same rate in. The lower kind of 30% of the distribution would be getting 90% wage replacement. Someone paying at $106,000 would be getting 50% wage replacement. So there's quite a bit of redistribution already built in with this cap. Okay,
So that's why I like it as a cap. It's something that's well defined, it's understood, it's targeted to a known parameter, and it already allows for quite a bit of redistribution. Why I discourage against going higher is 2 reasons. One is that if you set a cap that's a lot higher than this, then you're charging the same percent of payroll up for people that only are getting 30%, 20% wage replacement. And there are 2 problems with that. One is that any idea that you're going to sell this then as a user's fee, when some of the people are paying in massive paying in beyond their expected benefit out, it's very hard to label that as a user's fee, which my understanding is under Tabor, ultimately this tax will be labeled as. If it's the case that a bunch of people are just paying tons more than they're ever to get their expected benefit out. The second reason why I think it's a bad idea, sort of related, is part of the argument that's been made in this room a lot is that once businesses experience this program, they realize they all businesses benefit from this program. And when you have a very high cap like this on taxable income, that by definition will not be true. That the firms with higher wage workers will be paying in they'll be paying in even under lower wage cap more than they get out. But with the higher wage cap, firms with high wage workers are paying in far more in than their expected benefit that they'll be getting out for their employees. So by definition, there'll be a bunch of firms that will, by definition, be much worse off under this program, given how much they pay in and how much they get out. So that's why I recommend a compromise number of 80% of the Social Security cap.
All right, so what Tara's proposing is collect paid family and medical leave premiums up to wages equal to 80% of the established Social Security maximum to be indexed with that Social Security maximum. That last part's probably unnecessary, but that's the benefit of tying it in the way that she did. What discussion do we need on that one? Y'all ready for a vote?
I don't think this needs to be said, but I do, knowing that sometimes putting the formula in versus the number is much.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for that.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Ready for vote? Okay.
It's 106,000.
Wondering where the 320 was.
Details matter.
Professor,
Here we go. Yeah, Dr. Duncan, here you go. It reads, collect paid family and medical leave premiums up to wages equal to 80% of the Social Security maximum. Parenthetically, today, $106,000, exactly $320. And then also implied here is that would index with, as the feds raise that Social Security maximum. Let's go to the votes. Campbell.
Yes.
Duncan. Kevin, was that a yes?
Yes.
Thank you. Haygood.
Yes.
Make.
Yes.
Manning. Marquez. McKinnish.
Yes.
Parker Murray.
Yes.
Petrak. Sullivan.
Yes.
Waligorski.
Yes.
White. Zoe.
Yes.
Good job, team. Alrighty. Tara? Yes. Well, free from 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. presently. So, does anyone want to write a additional considerations on that particular one? Going nuts. All right, here we go. So, Daniel, if you roll us over a little bit.
I think what's left is stuff we just agreed on the phone yesterday.
There are a couple things that do not apply there. but the majority are. So let's see if we can accelerate a little bit. So this one is CDLE would be tasked with the regulation, execution, and management of a universal social insurance program. That was voted yesterday. Any additional discussion or anything need to be stated on that one? Stacy.
There's nothing on that one, but I want to make sure that we don't overlook a couple things that I know we've talked about here.
Sure.
One is kind of an exemption or opt-out for companies that have benefits equal to or better. And I think another one
That's
is
here though. It's
okay.
12B.
Got it. And the other one I know we've discussed is seasonal workers. Where is that?
So that was in other exemptions over here.
Under job protection.
Under job protections, seasonal workers. Yep. That's not to say that you know exactly what you were meaning, but that's where it was, that term next to Peters. Okay. All right. So good on this one based on yesterday's vote, and that's awfully fresh. Okay. The next one that was a yesterday vote was the state should invest in education program for both workers and employers. Should probably read for workers and employers, and engage other community providers such as doctors, Medicaid, WIC program, Planned Parenthood, faith communities, etc., who may play a role in raising awareness of these benefits. This is based upon the lessons learned of take rate is very low in the beginning because awareness is very low. So cast a big tent and also make sure that we are educating both workers and employers on their benefits and obligations under this. Okay. Any questions there?
I would just say, listen, I'm, you know, the word invest is pretty vague to me.
Okay.
Do we want to put resource or fund? Or do you think that comes by invest?
So I hear what you're saying. And in terms of the, you know, like, if we put it in invest, that implies that that's coming out of your budget. If we say we are encouraging this or some other word, I mean, you know, there are people that receive federal funding that could very easily do that as an outreach program already in existing purviews, and so.
Well, that's my biggest concern. It's what budget, so that they should budget for this cost in the administration of the plan. Sometimes that doesn't happen, and then you work on your So just, I don't think, is this, what I picked up on yesterday, we don't want to assume that what's happening.
Right.
So Joe, would it help if we said allocate a portion of premiums collected?
Just to assure that it takes place and it's funded to take place. A lot of times, the legislation is, well, said it in there, but where's the money to do it?
Kathy?
We're maybe just talking about developing and implementing an education program plan so that,
Fund, develop, and implement or execute?
yeah, a plan. Because it's not that CDLE would be responsible for doing all of it, but would have a plan for saying, yeah.
So that's effectively a friendly amendment. Does that affect anybody's vote on that item? Just making it more clear so that we don't miss the point. Okay, I don't see any. All right. So the next one. The next one also is a yesterday item. This was the role of third-party vendors on program sustainability. CDLE has full control of the program and should engage vendors to provide services that allow the program to run more efficiently and economically, such as technology, actuarial services, etc. And the department cannot provide in-house, but core program functions such as claims determination, decisions, enforcement, etc., should remain with CDLE. Any friendly wording changes, or Trish? We get Trish a mic.
And then again, this goes back to the AFL-CIO letter. I did not have a chance to read that before yesterday's conference call because I was on the road. But just to give another perspective to Pinnacle, we actually had Pinnacle as our carrier for many years at Steamboat until we had to go to a multi-state carrier. And our experience with Pinnacle was very positive, and even my recollection from employees, because if we'd had a lot of dissatisfied employees, they would have been in my office. And there were actually very, very few of those. So from a customer service standpoint, I feel that the letter misrepresented some of that. So I just wanted to make a comment on that. And the other part that with Pinnacle that really helped us, and they still represent a large number of ski resorts in Colorado, a lot of their focus was on injury prevention as well as claims management. But when you talk about taking care of employees and taking care of the workers, it's injury prevention, and especially in a high-risk industry in Colorado with the ski industry. So I just wanted to make that comment. I might have voted differently had I read the letter beforehand and had more opportunity to really think through that.
Any other suggestions related to this one? Okay. Fund solvency under various models. So this is one that. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. I don't think I did it on the one before, did I? Did somebody just hit me with a cattle prod or something when you see? Like, are there any cliffs around here? So just put a guardrail. All right. So we've got. We actually really only have two. So CDLE be tasked with regulation, management of social insurance program. Who wants to write the majority opinion on that one?
I see that go hand in hand with what we're about to get to from like social insurance overall.
Okay. Anybody want to write a minority? How about the state should invest in an education program? Lydia? Thank you. Any minority opinion on that one? Okay. Then CDLA has full control of the program and should engage vendors. This was really just around program sustainability. Author on that one? Lydia, or Jared, can I impose upon you? I feel like it goes quite closely with the regulation exercise and should be free too. You okay with that? Sure. Thank you.
I think it goes.
I think you're probably right. Okay. Any minority opinion on that one? Trish, would you? This was full control of the program, engaging vendors. You want one? Okay. We'll cut back up. Right. Here we are. This is item 12, fund solvency under various models. So the type of program. Back on the 12th, you all voted enact a paid family medical leave program as a social insurance model administered by the state. That was a vote of 9 ayes, 3 nays, and 1 abstention. And the abstention, as I recall, was, Stacy, your representative, Dan. Okay? So we have received some new information on this one since. We've had a number of discussions on this one since. What more discussion do we need around the type of program? Okay. Who wants to? Right, Jared? Yeah.
And I've got some data now to do some calculations. Thank you very much to the CDLE people. So I'm going to be able to provide you with some actual tables of distributional impacts, hopefully, if I can understand the data. in time.
In one sentence?
And this is Lydia. I think this brings up a good question in terms of, you know, do we delve into more of a supplemental section on this conversation?
So mine will be, that will be an appendix.
Yeah.
But the point is that will be made in the appendix, so he'll be able to reference that.
Excellent. So, and thank you. I feel like we have had a lot of conversations. We want to reflect that in the report, but we also want space to dive in.
So it feels like we need to absolutely answer the mail on employer mandate model.
You know, I'm happy to write in the minority opinion. I can write that, you know, some task force members may support the Pinnacle proposal, but my no vote was no on social insurance, and so my rationale for that is not simply support for a different path, but criticisms of the social insurance model.
So you want to write sort of two
I can
separate?
include all of that. Yeah.
Okay.
Because I think we ought to reflect the, you know, the arguments made in favor of the employer mandate model even.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Any others want to write a minority opinion related to the
I welcome
model
help. If
type?
there's anybody on the task force who's really positive on Pinnacle, I welcome that help. I could solicit help.
Yeah, really employer mandate model. Option to allow employers with private plans to opt out. Allow employers with equivalent private plans to opt out. Under both the high and low model, that's what was sent to the actuary. Do we need a fresh recommendation related to opt out? I see some, let's just go to the votes. Everybody okay with that? So reword this slightly to allow employers with equivalent private plans to provide their own version of the state plan, or that meets the state minimums, or something along those lines.
Yeah, this is Dana. Somebody made the point many meetings ago that they didn't like the phrase opt out, and I mentioned this a little bit yesterday, but opt out to me means that you get a pass, and the more I think about that, they're not getting a pass. They're either meeting the standard or they're in compliance to what the state is doing. So that, to me, would be a word choice change that I think is more representative, because I think anybody else looks at it as, well, they don't have to play. They are playing to the point where they're either meeting or exceeding what the state is doing. So that's why I think we should keep that verbiage.
Okay, here's a suggestion for you. And this is as few words as I can use. Allow employers with equivalent private plans to
Employers to offer equivalent private plans in place of the state plan.
allow employers to offer equivalent private plans in place of the state plan.
I would also add that there are a couple of ones, I can't remember, I think it's Massachusetts, one of the states, where there's an administrative fee. The employer, as they put in an application to show that they're meeting or exceeding the standard, it's like $250. That makes sense to me, because there's going to be a cost for the state to look through that. So even if we want to go more than that, I would be supportive. There's also verbiage in the two states that I came across that have equivalency plans. One is that they're renewing every year. One is that you have a longer period of time unless your plan changes. Anytime you have a plan change, you have to come back to the state and go from there. I personally think that also makes some sense. There should be some rigor to meeting the standard.
We need more discussion on that concept. We need a vote on that concept.
We got a unanimous vote yesterday on.
This was just presenting to the actuary, so we can do the vote on this
So the language, we would have to add language that the private plans would pay for state cost of supervision, whatever, of implementing or oversight of
Private plans would be responsible for
cost of certification.
paying fees needed, cost of certification, something like that. Good with that? Any other suggestions for wording changes before we vote? All right, well, let's go to the vote then. Campbell.
Yes.
Duncan? Duncan?
Sorry, I muted myself. There seems to be more background noise now. Maybe you could turn your microphone back on. I'm sorry, but I'm not quite. Can you read the language to me on what we're voting for, please? Sorry.
Sure. It reads, allow employers to offer equivalent or better private plans in place of the state plan. Private plans would be responsible for the cost of certification by the state.
I vote yes.
Thank you. Haygood.
Yes.
Make.
Yes.
Manning. Yes. Marquez. McKinnish.
Yes.
Parker Murray.
Yes.
Petrak.
Yes.
Sullivan.
Yes.
Waligorski.
Yes.
White.
Yes.
Zoe.
Yes.
Right. Who wants to author this recommendation?
I would love to.
I thought you might. And are there any other things for consideration? I don't think we can by definition have a minority opinion, but there are other folks who'd like to add a few lines? All right. So the next item is benefit portability. This is item 13, bottom of page 4. So I'm not sure that the date is correct there, but based on the task force's vote for a social insurance program, portability is assumed. Trish?
Yeah, to be more precise, based on our choice of eligibility standard, portability is assumed. It's not really dependent on the model, it's based on the fact that eligibility for the paid benefit is based entirely on meeting the UI threshold of earnings in the previous calendar year, or not in the previous 12 months. And that has nothing about that is linked to whether you change jobs, change employment status, anything. So it's the eligibility threshold.
Trish?
In thinking along those lines, and this is one of the areas where I do have a concern, albeit even in a social insurance program, I get with what Tara's saying. However, from trying to manage a business, especially a seasonal business or temporary workers, that can be really disruptive to a business. So for example, if we're hiring someone for 5 months and they've been working at different employers, and we just need them for the season, whether it's winter or summer, and they have the ability to take paid family leave and they've only been on the job for a couple of weeks and they're off for, say it's going to be 12 weeks. That's pretty much an entire season. So with that being said, I feel like even with the social insurance model, I would recommend we have a vote on that.
Well, I guess, I mean, this goes back to the distinction between wage replacement benefits and job protection. So we're not saying that job protection is portable. Job protection in that example would be tied to, and we didn't have a 8 vote, we had the range of numbers, but it would be tied to that period of time. Whereas if somebody's been employed with you as a seasonal worker for less time than, say, it's 120 days or 180 days, whatever it may be, they might be able to access the wage replacement benefit, but that doesn't mean you need to keep them on board. So I don't know if you have a concern with even the ability of people to access wage replacement if they have cancer or they have a new baby, or military family caregiving needs, safe leave, whatever the needs may be. Even if you can fire them, essentially, you don't have to hold the job open. Because there is a big distinction between portable wage replacement, especially given that we voted, or collectively the task force voted for 100% employee paid. The idea that that wouldn't be portable is a concern. If workers have paid and earned enough for a benefit, that then they could be denied access to them separate from the job protection.
Yeah, I think to Jared's point, we're really talking about two different things. If someone breaks their leg, they're not going to be showing up to work anymore. Yeah, and the question becomes, will they be eligible for the benefits, provided that they have already paid into it. And then I think that the concern that you have, which I also have, has to do with more with job protection. That if they break their leg, 1 week into their job, do we have to hold their job for them? We don't have to hold their job for them, but they're entitled to collect the benefits that for which they already contributed to.
Diana, and then back to Trish.
I understand the nature of that, and I also understand that job protection is separate. But I'm also thinking about this in terms of how things work in theory and how they work in practice. And if I'm going to hire someone, I know right away I have a lot of training costs, and those are right front and center. And so for me to move past that potential that they might be gone, a week later is I mean, I would want to make that part of the decision, but I don't see it not entering the decision point.
And I get that too, but I see this separate from job protection. It's having the ability for people to leave, and when you hire them for a short duration of time, and then be able to collect benefits, and they're no longer a part of your workforce.
Hadley?
Just to maybe verify or add my 2 cents, I think what Trish is talking about, maybe what Diana's talking about, is that when you have wage replacement, it's an incentive for people to not work. And in some cases, like if you have a broken leg, you're not going to work anyway. But there are other scenarios where there's a choice to be made. And when you offer wage replacement, that's going to increase it's going to allow more people to confidently take time out of work for whatever medical emergency. If it's in their family, if I'm thinking about, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking about a scenario where, God forbid, my mother has gotten very ill and she needs care. And I live in Colorado and I have a sister who lives in Tennessee. My sister in Tennessee would not be eligible for any wage replacement if she took time off from work to care for mom, but I would be. So in that scenario, Colorado is establishing for our workforce this cushion, and I think that's the goal of it. But the trade-off, of course, is that there's a tension there between, showing up at work and being with your family member. And so I'm sympathetic to Trish's point, but I think the challenge is, from a policy perspective, what are you going to do about it? I mean, how are you going to restrict access to benefits that people have paid in for? So that's where the rubber hits the road for me, because I hear Trish's point. I think that's, we're incentivizing people to, if it's a question or an option for them, we're making it the option more attractive for them to take time out of work.
And I see that.
Stacy and then Tara.
I kind of see that as being one of the problems. So, yeah, I understand the possible need for leave and affordability of that benefit. But if I come to Steamboat and you spend time hiring me, you get me trained and everything, and then I decide, I need to take leave a week into it, that just doesn't quite work for a lot of employers. And I think there should be, if
So, I understand I understand why this happened this way, but what this discussion is really about is whether the eligibility threshold should be different than the one we've already voted in. So it really comes up to whether anyone on this task force would actually like to go back to the eligibility threshold that we already voted in and reopen that discussion and propose an alternative eligibility threshold. For example, you are eligible to collect benefits if you've met the UI earnings threshold and also have spent X weeks with your current employer and designate X weeks. I will definitely vote against that, right? I think that the program breaks down in important ways if you do that, but that's if you want to resolve this discussion, that's what we have to do. So the question is, does anyone want to put a motion on the table that offers up an alternative eligibility threshold that includes a time spent with current employer? And then we can vote on it.
And that would require supermajority, correct? Because we're going back to a previous.
I don't think.
I'm
No
that
vote was ever taken.
yeah. I'm willing to put this up to a misunderstanding of where this belongs. So I'm not gonna put a larger parliamentary bar on reopening it because I think that was just sort of a misunderstanding of where this belonged. But that's what this is. So that's sort of my question is, does anyone want to make a proposal to add a weeks with current employer to the eligibility requirement?
I would be a no on that. I mean, I wish cancer waited. I wish motor vehicle accidents waited.
That's the question.
I really do. But I mean, I think, I hear that, but also like these are catastrophic life events we're talking about. These are not things that people often plan for. So, to me, I think portability is one of those hard lines for me. So I would be a no on that. But thank you.
Do we have that? Do we have the motion?
I just have a thought. Go ahead. So would there be consideration for if we left eligibility when you're at your first employer? It's what we said earlier. But when you go to another employer and you are taking your portable benefit, but then there might be.
So that is exactly the language I used, right? So it's one of two things. It's either you're eligible, as what we would put before is if you've met the UI threshold, which is earnings in the past 12 months, you are eligible for benefits. End of the line. Doesn't matter if you've been, what your current employment status is or whether you've played jobs. If you want to change the eligibility requirement to be that earnings threshold plus time with current employer, so that when you change jobs, there'd be some period where you are not eligible for benefits, and you want to propose some number of weeks you need to be with your current employer in order to be eligible, then that's what is being put on the table here. And in order to move past this, we have to have a vote. In order to do that, someone has to put on table a motion that specifies a number of weeks with current employer, right? So that's sort of the question.
Are we at that point? Is either of the hands over here going to propose that date? Okay.
We have not heard anyone anytime we brought that up.
No, but someone could propose it, we can vote on it, but that's what's being proposed that would have, in order to deal with this, the only way to deal with this is for someone to propose an alternative eligibility threshold that has this feature in it, so we can vote.
I think that this conversation is I think it's gonna open a lot, and that's fine, but I just feel like I'm just not really understanding why, like a company or someone would not want to allow people to have access to wage replacement. Like, and as Jared was saying, like, if the worker's paying in 100% of that wage, it is, they're qualifying from their previous year, right, or look back period. And also with job protection, it could be that you have to wait 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. That's up to, policymakers to decide. But let's say that there is an accident that happens, like your second week in, that employer does not have to, save the job. It's the employer, and that's where the relationship ends. And that's where the employer, actually in this model, they wouldn't even be paying any premiums. So there's no responsibility on the employer at all. So I'm just not really understanding why would an employer, if they have no responsibility under paying a premium, premium, no responsibility of holding a job, that they would still want that worker not to receive wage replacement in a time when they probably need it the most because, you know, I come from a low income family. I've grown up and, you know, when you're trying to pay rent, you know, when you're trying to pay your medical bills, you know, I think some people, any bill, you know, even if it's $100, can mean that you might not have food on the table. And I can just share that my family, when I grew up, you know, we sometimes, you know, you just didn't buy meat. You bought this like rice, beans, milk. So again, I'm just really kind of struggling to understand why would you want to hurt workers when they're already hurting. And
So I have to ask a question. Does anybody want to offer the motion? And I'm not disagreeing with you, Judith, or trying to shut you down.
Yeah.
I think we've had that conversation actually in every one of our meetings. So the question is, do we want to offer a threshold? Does anyone want to propose that?
I will.
Okay. If you can propose it in a way that Daniel will write it up here, and then we'll take a vote.
That we offer up an alternative eligibility threshold of working for an employer of, I would say, 6 months of 6 months with an employer. It's halfway between 0 and a year, which is what family medical leave is, and so 26 weeks. To work for a specific employer.
To be eligible
to collect wage replacement.
I was gonna throw out shorter than that, 90 days.
Do you accept that as a friendly amendment, or do you want to go to vote? Okay.
I would like to have a comment.
Go ahead.
The very real consequence of saying something like that cuts both ways. It cuts to the benefit of the employer for some perceived protection against some transient employee coming in who has already fully paid for the benefit. That is the perceived benefit to the employer. But it cuts to the employees who may have already fully paid for and is eligible, who is facing real consequential emergencies in their homes. And just because they get a new job, somehow they're penalized from being able to take that benefit for which they have paid. This is the double edge that we're confronting with. I cannot get a good conscience saying that perceived benefit to the employer who's going to lose that employee if it's unavoidable for the protection of some small percentage of quote unquote bad actors who may game the system. I just cannot see that being a reasonable, logical agreement.
Thanks, Ed. Diana?
In my mind, I think it really goes to Hadley's point here, and that is that, I mean, if this is like a broken leg or a car accident, that's a whole different thing than having to take leave for something that you might have other options for. And I guess I am looking at this in terms of what's the best outcome, not, you know, whether this is good for employers or good for employees. And I guess I'm still concerned about hurting the outcomes all around the board if an employer has to choose an employee that might be gone right away. And I'm thinking that they may tend to hire people that require less training, so that they don't have to make that investment right away. Or they might choose to hire people that that they perceive as not posing that immediate chance of exit, you know, before they've had a chance to gain from the training investment.
mean, to that argument, first, an employer is not going to know if an employee who they're hiring under a social insurance model has already qualified based on their work history in all likelihood. Even if they did, if what we're suggesting is that there might be decisions made on somebody having qualified because they have a serious health condition or might have a serious health condition, or because you think they're going to have a baby, you're likely already breaking several laws under disability or pregnancy-related discrimination. I mean, I think what this comes down to is it's incentivizing to who has been raped or experienced domestic violence to have to come to work when they might have a real need to take time off. But again, this goes back to the fact that per the vote that was taken, this is something that workers have paid for and qualified for, and I find it very concerning to suggest that that could be denied to people under these circumstances.
Call question?
All right, we'll go to vote. It is written, Kevin, for your visibility. Offer up an additional eligibility threshold of working for a specific employer for 6 months to qualify for wage replacement benefit.
Thank you.
Sure. Campbell. Duncan.
No.
Sorry, Kevin, you're really hard to hear.
No.
Thank you. Say it like you're from the South. No. Okay, good. Make.
No.
Manning. Marquez. McKinnish.
No.
Parker Murray. Petrak.
This is independent of who's paying the premium. So it could be EREE, it could be all EE.
I think we have to do it in light of our own recommendations at this point.
Worker pays 100% and employer gets to say, not until these provisions.
Yes. Sullivan.
Yes.
Waligorski.
No.
White. Zoe.
No.
9 noes, 3 yeses. Okay. 1 abstention. Thank you. All right, so we have an incremental in here. So do we simply say, we don't write a portability recommendation? We just simply say, based on the choice of eligibility standard, that is the U-high threshold, portability is assumed. And leave it like that, because we've got to address the element. Show of thumbs, you guys all okay with that? Okay. All right, then to reflect your concern though, Trish and others, do we need over on eligibility do you want to also author a minority opinion language? Okay. Okay, sustainability of the, oh, hey, break. You guys ready for break? Let's do this. Let's take a full 15, but that's the last time we're going to do it until 5 o'clock, so make good use of it. We will start up again promptly at 2:20 by that clock. Okay, folks, we are in the home stretch. We have a few more things to discuss. Okay. So the rest of the plan is public comment. So we'll do adjourn at 5, public comment at 4:40. We need a little bit of time for you all to do your own closing comments to each other as we kind of go to the writing, and we need time to plan the calendar. What needs to happen by when? And Admira and Jeff have sketched out a calendar for us. We're going to review that and make sure everybody's okay with it. Okay? And then the last thing that we have to do is cover these last few items. So, sustainability of the program was item number 14. We've had no votes on that so far. Maybe that's why we've had no votes. Jeff?
This is my best guess.
It's on now.
Oh, here we go. So my best guess as to what sustainability means, reading between the lines, was two things. One, it was solvency, and we've got a report on that. And then the other one was this notion of, and this is, in the weeds a little bit, if we had a third party and that was doing a social insurance model, and if we had to transition from one third party to another third party, how would we see continuity and sustainability in that very specific scenario?
I'm so not interested in talking about that.
Okay, let's go to Edwin. Can we get a microphone for Edwin, please? Sandra? Trish, could you pass the microphone to Edwin? Thanks.
Or Jared, that's what I come back to us. I see sustainability being able to address fairly simply by the actuaries' comment that we need to have systems in place to monitor and evaluate the sustainability program. So some language to that effect that we recommend the procedures be established to monitor the solvency and the efficacy, whatever proper term.
Okay. So the language would be something like establish mechanisms to perform regular reviews to ensure the solvency and persistency of any program.
Yes.
Diana, were you going to go?
Right, because I think each state, but some of this has come with experience, have written very specific language about how they go about that rate setting in an effort to create some kind of certainty and expectations. A lot of different ways they've done that. This is a little bit where that idea that I had about the Connecticut model, but from what I understand reading California's model, it's developed over time, but it's a very specific formula.
Solvency and yeah, we've got solvency under various models as another. Very well. Other adjustments on that? Feels like this should go in there somewhere, right? I mean, that's like a fundamental thing. Do you all want additional discussion on that one, or do you want to take a vote on this one and then potentially add others that you believe will contribute to sustainability? Here we go, we're going to vote. Kevin, it reads, establish mechanisms to perform regular reviews and make needed adjustments to ensure sustainability and solvency of any paid family medical leave program. Campbell?
Yes.
Duncan?
Yes.
Haygood?
Yes.
Make?
Yes.
Manning?
Yes.
Marquez? McKinnish?
Yes.
Parker Murray?
Yes.
Petrak?
Yes.
Sullivan?
Yes.
Waligorski?
Obviously, yes.
White? Enzo?
Yes.
Okay. Are there other similar things that we can add around sustainability? Good enough?
Promote opting in versus private pay.
Say more about that.
Like companies choosing to use other insurances versus opting in with everybody to increase the pool so that it stays solvent.
What do you all think about that idea?
To me, I think we've covered that in a lot of other places in terms of we've said if you do equivalent, you have to pay a little bit to have that administrative review. We've talked about, different models, and so I feel like that's in there for me, but I'm happy to hear more too.
You want to make a formal motion, Sandra? Okay. Any others around sustainability? Okay. Who would like to write the opinion on that? Rationale, thank you.
I can do it, that's fine, I'll do it. Yeah.
Thanks, Hadley. Remember, brief is good. Okay, we have another item, this is item 15, how the program would interact with other benefits. We've spoken a bit about private benefits. So we have public benefits and private benefits. Yesterday, we talked about public benefits, and Admira gave us an overview of workers' comp and UI. You all reached unanimous vote on that one. Is there any reason to revisit that item? Who would volunteer to be the author of the public benefit interaction item? But not all at once.
So, yeah, this might be the one area where workers' comp and UI respectively might be able to just lend some language from our respective divisions.
Okay. Daniele? Does anyone want to write a minority opinion on that, or would really be a minority opinion? It was unanimous. Other considerations? Appreciate the body language, by the way. That helps. Okay. Employer-provided benefits. The task force recommends a paid family and medical leave program that would not allow stacking of like benefits, i.e. disability benefits. Additionally, employers would not be allowed to require employees to exhaust or concurrently use their accrued leave, PTO, blah, 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 before or while taking paid family or medical leave under the state program. So one item on here was, this used to read, I think 12-1. It was a telephonetic error, so we've corrected that, it's unanimous. Is there any reason to discuss that in greater detail? Who wants to write that recommendation? Yep, Lydia, thank you. Any need for additional considerations? Cool. Last one. Here we go. Implementation timelines. We talked about this one yesterday, and after a few different proposed amendments, the group went back to the original language in the text that was voted on unanimously. Is it incorrect? Okay. Can we go back to the actual vote? possible that we have a copy paste error. Was it 11-2? 11-2. Okay. I remember now, Judith. This is the one you were talking about earlier around voting for something as voting against it. Basically, is the only way to be able to write a note. So, would the two of you be satisfied at votes regardless? Do you two want to sign up to write the minority opinion on this one? Yeah. Okay. So, Sandra. And
Questions? So what's gonna be going on in 2021?
Rules, regs, database, a lot of
procurements,
In other states, they're building their system.
right.
hiring. Cases. Okay. Who wants to write the majority opinion on that one? Who wants to write the rationale for that recommendation? Kathy? Christmas is canceled, Kathy. You can have Christmas next year. All right. Okay, guys, give yourself a round of applause. Okay. By my count, we have 17 where we do not have consensus. We're going to write, here's the case for this version, here's the case for that version. Okay? Rationale for each of the two. That's pretty good. From where we were a while ago, I think that's a pretty strong performance and a testament to how you all have worked together. So let's do this. Are there any topics that we have not yet addressed? Gaps, holes, things that we need a recommendation around to close it up. Anything you can think of.
This is Kevin. We have the governor's letter
Yes.
recommending that we investigate a third-party provider. We had Pinnacle just talk about the benefits of it. I think based on the questions that were asked, there are a lot of questions about those benefits. So I'm wondering if we need to add something. When we talked about a third party, we talked about sustainability. I think that was the constraint. But do we want to have a section, benefits and disadvantages, that specifically addresses the governor?
So Kevin, how we've talked about that so far is that under item 12, the type of program, you all have voted for a universal social insurance program, and we have room there to entertain the alternative. Hadley agreed to do that in addition to her own opinion around potential other structures. Would you be proposing we handle that differently, that we create a separate section?
If it can be in there, that's fine. It just seems to me that since Pinnacle spoke, are there additional things we want to add to that part of the report?
So Kevin, this is Lydia. The way I've been thinking about this is that we would document in the report the times and the interaction that we've had with Pinnacle in terms of they presented at several meetings, several conversations we're having with task force members. So we would document that as part of the report. For the concerns and other things that we had, Tara and Hadley are going to be working on some more detailed information around Pinnacle, around that question 12. So, but I mean, this has something that we've gone back and forth on in terms of like how much do we reflect it in the overall report. And so we'll certainly document it, but in terms of having room in this report for detailed analysis of those, I think that is probably a supplemental. Does that sound okay to everybody, or should we discuss that more?
My 2 cents on this is because here's item 12A, where we talk about the type of program, right? This is like, I don't have a good analogy, but it's something very important kind of embedded halfway through a long list of other recommendations. And so I might suggest, and I confess that I have only skimmed what I believe is a draft executive summary to attach to the first of the recommendations, that perhaps in the introductory section of the report or in the executive summary, we include some discussion. I'm not talking about term paper. I'm talking about, a couple paragraphs, something like that, just to emphasize the importance and the weight that item 12A has in terms of shaping the rest of the recommendations. Because I think it's actually a foundational decision to make. Which policy direction will the state take? And then after that, there's where your decision tree starts, right? And a lot of the recommendations are kind of premised on if we have a statewide policy for paid family medical leave, if it's an employer mandate model, if it's a social insurance model, then these are the recommendations that we make, right? So I think clarifying that in the executive summary and recording that we've had a great deal of discussion about it, and recording that the consensus majority vote is for a universal social insurance program, and here's, why, really short, and then just to say other members of the task force do not support that model for but reasons, and I think putting that somewhere in the report ahead of the list of summary recommendations, I think it merits that kind of attention.
All right, so would there be room in this for the issues that Jared and Tara raised about universal versus kind of industry-specific premium rates?
So Kevin, this is Tara. So I'm going to write an appendix that's not going to be in the report. You might have not heard. I'm going to do a little bit of data analysis. I'll geek out a little bit, because I've got nothing else to do over the holidays. So so there'll be an appendix that gives a little detail on the distributional issues and some information. But that won't be that'll just be referenced in the body of the report. It'll be added as a supplement.
Kevin,
All right, because one thing, from an economic perspective, my question to the Pinnacle people had to do with insurance companies, national insurance companies participating in this. So if CDLE administers this, then the administrative costs of the program, those expenditures remain in Colorado, used to employ CDLE employees. It keeps that money in and that economic activity in the state. When you have out-of-state insurance companies participating, Aon and then the other, the Pinnacle people that mentioned there might be up to 4 national companies providing insurance, then some of that administrative cost is going to leak out. And that would tend to reduce economic activity. Now, the administrative costs are not high. With the Denver study, they were 2.5% of premiums, but that should be considered a cost of the program. So would that be something suitable to add in some section?
So Jared is quarterbacking that section, so he'd be the one to handle your
All
comment.
right, okay. Okay, I'll talk to Jared about that. That's fine. That was my only question. Thank you.
I think that's a good point, so I don't think I would go into that detail in the executive summary by any means, but certainly.
Yeah, but this is Jared. Yeah, so Kevin, happy to talk offline or incorporate a bullet, because I think that is a good point, not one that has really been surfaced. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I wonder, so I said something earlier, you create frames and frameworks and formats to help you do things quickly and to make it easy on the reader. If this is one where it doesn't fall neatly into, we probably spend as much time on that topic as any other. So if you need to, Jared, change the format or a bit more about the rationale for each and the task force's discussion, I think that would be a fine place for you to get creative. Other issues, things we haven't covered. That was a good one, Kevin. Anything else that we just haven't addressed yet? Yeah. Soon others will freak out. They just haven't read it yet. So, Edwin, you had a point around wanting to say some thoughts. Should we go to the closing plan and then offer for everybody to have word? Okay, so this is a little bit of an eye chart. It is the last page in your scorecard. In my conversations with Jeff and Admira, what we said is, look, you've got a bunch of individual drafters, okay? They've got to do their work. That then has to go to someone who integrates that into a single draft. And a whole bunch of groups working independently, there's probably going to be some overlap, or there'll be some gaps and all that stuff. You've got to synthesize it first, then send it out to everybody for their review. Okay, and there are 15 of you, 13 plus 2 ex officio. You need a bit of time to propose your edits. Then again, someone has to integrate those edits and recirculate a report. Then you have those edits due to the compiler, who then needs to make the final adjustments. So it's effectively some drafting, a review in totality, some edits, a review in totality, a submission. Okay? Okay. So, Jeff, having looked at the calendar, explain why you and Admira chose those dates. Because there's no options. Because there's no options.
I was hoping that would be self-evident. Basically, we need to do 2 rounds of edits before 1/8, and we've got 2, not 1, but 2 holidays mashed in there. So this is what I proposed relative to what might be feasible coming out of today, and then in terms of consecutive turnarounds on that, and then giving Stacy and Lydia a final glance before hitting the send button.
So you get 7 days, okay, to get your individual drafting done. Then Jeff and Admira are going to take just 2 work days to stitch that all together, ship it out to you. You then get 2 work days to put your edits back in. Okay? And you know, when we sketch that out, there's just no other slack in the system.
And I guess the only other thing I would add to that is my thought is the first round of writing would take the longest. Rounds 1 and 2 of editing should take significantly shorter periods of time.
Pass to Kathy.
Could we possibly make that first draft rush, the first task due on maybe the earlier part of the day of the 26th, so that for those of us who are going to be sitting around on the 24th and 25th, we can take that time? It's just that, yeah, I mean, I don't know about you all, but I have a little kid who's expecting the Christmas magic, and so my time between now and then, I can do it. I'm just saying that if the longer time I can have, the better. It would be for me. So like the earlier part of the day of the 26th. Are you really going to look at it on the 23rd?
Am I going to look at on no.
My understanding is what always has to happen with it first is formatting, right? You guys aren't going to be editing or anything. It's just a matter of getting our stuff incorporated. So pure formatting. It's just a matter of the time taken to. And it doesn't have to look pretty on the first round, right? You just have to get the text there. If you don't have time to make everything look cohesive for the first
Do I
round,
get a sand?
right? That would be
Give me
okay.
the mic.
The only thing I would say to that is if we acquiesce on that, which I don't have severe heartburns about, is that if we establish early part of 12/26 that you actually respect that deadline, and it doesn't suddenly become 4 p.m. on 12/26?
10 a.m.
10 a.m. Mountain Time is 12 p.m. Eastern. That is a good point. I will be on the East Coast. I'll be on the East Coast.
We can say noon. We can say noon.
Mountain time. That's the mountain thing.
Okay. Other suggestions similar to that? So one other thing that I probably goes without saying, but what's written up in here is at the end there's probably going to still be a few points where some things don't agree, or somebody in the writing of something needs license to explain, and all of a sudden it's like, well, we didn't really talk about that with the task force. Okay, so my proposal to you all is that you authorize Lydia and Stacy to be the final voices on that, to say, hey, look, can't include it, or are going to include it, but it's going to be an appendix with a link, you know, whatever those last minute emerging things, and I can't even think of what one might be, but as soon as you start to write these things, the brain takes over. So are you all okay asking Lydia and Stacy to be the final arbiters of inclusion? Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Okay. Please, can we pass the mic to Heather?
I'm feeling this is going to be confused, but I also think Tara might like it. I wonder if for the rationale and the concerns and clarifications and the minority opinion sections that we're all drafting, does anyone think it's a good idea to put a word count limit on these?
Words or characters?
Words.
Maybe spaces count?
Yeah. So one suggestion is single page.
Just say five. Just say
Too long?
I was thinking like 300 words.
Okay.
That's what I was thinking. Maybe 500 for things like Jared and I.
500 is a person space, so we don't know
Only for sections, lovely. But I think 300 in general is probably good. I'm talking an upper limit. I'm not saying you have to write 300. I'm saying upper limit. But that's my suggestion.
I think strive and
I will say this is one concern I have about the report is escalation, right? So if one person writing their piece starts, elaborating a lot and kind of passionate because they're passionate about the point, starts getting into lots of detail and stuff, then when it gets circulated, a person writing sort of up to that will kind of feel that they need to respond to all of that, and we can end up with escalation. We can end up with a report that no one will ever read except for the staff member that drew the short straw, in the office pool. So yeah, I think we really need to strive to avoid that dynamic.
That's what word count.
Show of thumbs, you guys all okay with the idea of kind of a 300 word target?
3 or 5.
So this draft without anything in it is already 22 pages. And so I think part of the challenge for Stacey and I will be to help edit and for everyone to try to be succinct as possible. Bullet points, brevity is key. You can do it. You can. Right, exactly. I would just say that maybe the majority opinion, if there is consensus, that maybe that could have a little bit just more space. If there was more consensus, so maybe just give me 400. Okay, there. And if not, let's keep going.
No. You can do it. You can do it. I promise you can do it.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've tried to do as examples is just utilize the strength of the work that has been provided for you, right? Connecticut found that 62% claims costs are attributable to blank. Right? Try to make your biggest points, and I think that's a tricky one. But if you only were given 3 points to make, which 3 would you choose? Because the dialogue can always go from there, but you shouldn't bury the lead. Any other thoughts on production of your final report? All right, so we're ahead of schedule. Miracle. So I support all in favor. I've become a voting member in that. I do think, though, it would be helpful as you all go from debate mode into synthesis mode to just share any final words with you. And Edwin has volunteered to go first and just share his perspective on what we've seen so far.
Thank you. As a layperson, I have to confess that when I was asked to serve on the task force, I declined because I imagine it would be very challenging, emotional, and at times, quite conflicted. And that much has bared fruit. And however, having gone through this process, I want to acknowledge and thank all of you, and very specifically, I want to thank Greg for your guidance. I imagine that one had to hear kittens. You'll be somewhat similar to what you're going through. And also, in terms of at one point, I thought I may have to step into the octagon with Dana to get some agreement on some things. And second is I want to thank the CDLE staff, specifically Jeff, Amira, and Daniel. It's for me as a citizen and taxpayer, it's been really heartening to see the integrity, professionalism, and dedication that I see you bring to the meetings. And I feel like our state is in great hands because of your dedication. So I really want to thank you for that. And the last is it's been an incredible honor to be on the task force with all of you, such talented and dedicated task force members. I cannot imagine a greater honor that I had in the past few months. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Other closing thoughts from task force members? We'll go to public comment after this, but I know that we told everybody it'd be 4:40, so in case anybody was planning to come back later, and if they do, we'll have them email you their comments, but Hadley, if we could pass the mic to Hadley.
Yes, I want to echo some of the things that Edwin said, and our appreciation to CDLE and to you, Greg. And I just want to express to my fellow task force members because, I came to this task force, and IWF works on this issue a lot at the federal level, but not at the state level. And so I feel like, I believe a lot of us feel like we have learned so much. This has been like taking a course, and it's had the course load to go with it. But it's been a really good educational experience for me, and I feel like I understand the issue so much better now than I did at the beginning of our task force gatherings, and that's thanks to all of you, my fellow task force members, particularly those of you who bring a lot of expertise about what's going on in other states, and I'm very impressed at your commitment to the information and to the debate, because it has always been, I believe, a respectful debate, and I say that as somebody who's got a minority view on most of our recommendations. And I also want to say that I really admire the heart that everybody brings to this, that I think it's with a sincere concern for Coloradans that we've done this work, and I'm proud to be a part of it. So thank you, fellow task force members, for bringing us all along, and I think we've had our discussions, and we have vehement disagreement, but particularly in a time when I feel like our political discussions can be characterized by a lack of charity and a lack of civility. This group's been tremendous, and I'm very, very proud of it. So thank you, and thanks to our chair people for helping with that, Lydia and Stacy.
Dana?
I will be succinct. I've learned a long time ago for any sentence that you all can say in 10 words, I need 20. So the 300 word max just really resonated with me. I'm going to start writing tonight so I can get it down in time. I also wanted to thank Lydia and Stacy. It's one thing to be on the committee. It's another thing to try to herd all the sheep when we're running all over the place. And I thought you guys did really, really well. I read a couple of articles from the media that talked about how our meetings were contentious. And I was like, really? I thought passionate, and I thought very articulate. And in looking back, a number of my views have changed because of being just hearing the different perspective. And if I could be king for a day, I think this is a model of how the state should leverage things, because hopefully they'll take a look at what we're providing them, and what was contentious and hard hopefully will get a little bit easier. And I think it also shows that in today's world you can have compromise, which sometimes is not exhibited in other places. And Greg, I think you are the cat's meow dude, so really good job. You too, Jeff.
Other task force members, closing comments?
I too just want to say thank you. It's been really a wonderful journey getting to know some of you. Some of you I've worked with a little bit longer than others, but I really appreciate that everybody brought their perspective, and I was able to learn from that quite a bit. And I think it will help me going into, as we move forward with this debate and see how legislators are going to approach it. I think just having the benefit of being in the same room with all of you, with our different perspectives and our different lived experience and our different concerns, and how we've managed to be really respectful. And I've learned so much from all of you, and I'm going to carry the spirit of that into the legislative session, and try to keep an open mind about where compromise can be found, where consensus can be had, where we can drive toward consensus. So I just want to say thank you to you all for the time that you've spent and really diligently working and bringing your best perspectives. And I want to thank the department, Pat and Admira and Jeff and Joe, for really creating a great environment for us and keeping us moving. This was a crazy, crazy timeline, but you all did it. Daniel, thank you as well. So thank you very much. I just wanted to say thank you.
This is Casey Campbell. I just say thanks for everybody and their participation. I think when we started, one of the things that I initially said was, when we leave this room, nobody probably is going to be 100% satisfied. And I think I kind of see that true today, but I got to say, we've gotten so much further than where I think I anticipated we would get at the very beginning. So I do thank everyone for their hard work and putting in their thoughts. They're tough. These are tough decisions when you get down to it, and everybody brings their important points, and I think it's great to hear those points and to really kind of see where we could make compromise. My hope would be that we are able to present a very balanced paid family leave program for the legislature to consider, as they go into the session. So I just say thank you for the opportunity.
And again, just thank you so much, all of you. I think we have gotten further than we anticipated. I'm so proud of all the green that we have on this board. I have learned from each of you and appreciate all of you and the contributions that you've made. And thank you so much, Greg and Jeff and Admira and Joe and Pat and all of our CDLE hosts. You've been amazing. I can't imagine better people to go on such a hard journey with. And so thank you, everyone, for your time and thank you in advance for the time that you're going to spend writing this report. We'll be in contact with you. Please answer my call. And I appreciate all of you so much. Thank you.
6.
Sure. Yes, I think everybody's covered it. I agree with that. And also want to thank Jamie for feeding us.
Yeah.
Obviously, as a key ingredient in these long meetings, so thank you.
Last call. Judith.
I just, yes, I appreciate this experience. I think it's, for me, it's gonna be, I think, I will always remember it. Like I mentioned, yeah, it's true. As I shared a lot, I think that for me, I become very passionate about this issue. I come, again, from a working class community where I do see this need tremendously. And I come from people that are really, really hardworking, that sometimes really don't have access to this benefit or even vacation time. And so I feel that it's been such an honor to bring that voice and bring those stories. And I think that all the public comments, such powerful stories of people that really need this benefit. And, I think that I'm just really proud of all the work that we've done together and the conversations that we have done together. And again, as I think Hadley was saying of like why this is so important is because, there's real people that are suffering out there that really need access to this so they could have a dignified life, as they face really serious challenges in regards to their health or even joyous moments, as Lydia was saying with like the birth of a baby, but that for people really to have, like for everyone to have that dignity in life, because sometimes in our society that's not guaranteed for everyone. And so for me it's just been thank you for everyone, and I'm just hopeful that the next legislative session and with our legislators, making final decisions, that they really think about, the workers that really need access to this. So thank you, everyone.
Green is good. So I just wanted to take a second. I do have a voice. I know I've mostly been a silent member of the group and non-voting, but I did want to extend our appreciation for being able to drop in with our rotating cast of characters, and appreciate your patience with that. The work that you've been doing has been admirable and really informs the work that my division will be doing statewide as we look as the state as an employer what we can do for our employees. So all the information and the perspectives that you've shared have really been invaluable in helping me inform my boss, the state personnel director, on your activities and what we might do for our staff. So again, appreciate all your work.
I'm so thankful to have a seat at the table to represent labor and just working people, and to kind of share what workers go through versus the employers, and how this will impact labor. So I'm so glad to have a seat at the table, and thank you guys. I learned so much being here.
Yeah, again, thank you. That's all I've said. But I just, when we walked into this, I was just so impressed by the incredible complexity of this, and how we were a bit of a motley crew coming from so many different perspectives. And Greg, I mean, your real-time work in helping us to get structure to the discussions and help us to find the right language and keep us pushing through it is admirable. And I do, as a minority voice, it's been kind of an interesting journey for me and rewarding. From my perspective, and again, this is all very personal to all of us. And I have a little photo on my workspace, and it's a picture of my grandmother and my mother and myself, and I'm holding my 1-week-old infant. And it's just a constant reminder to me of how this has just been a process that's been going on for decades. And there's learning that's happening all the time, and there are no perfect answers. And so And also that my husband and I both started businesses when we had absolutely nothing. My husband had to start his business in somebody else's garage because we didn't even have a garage. And so, I'm strongly concerned about making sure that that opportunity is available to anyone. And it's a challenging thing to do to start and operate a small business. And it's not for the faint of heart, but it needs to be an option for everyone. But again, this whole process has been a learning experience, and I really appreciate it. And thank you for all of your extra work.
Last call, Trish?
I just want to say thank you to the entire group, CDLE, Lydia, Stacy. This has been a tremendous learning opportunity for me as well, and to hear all the different perspectives and how the conversations went. They were good debates. And I think the state of Colorado, however we end up, where we end up, will benefit from this. So thanks to everyone.
All right.
Greg, what do you have to say? Your final remarks.
Don't you think I talk enough?
Are we just as mangy as when we started?
So I'm a small business owner. I'm a Pinnacle client. I am a twice father. And once we had no leave, and once we had a very generous package. So I'm very appreciative of the fact that you all came with it. And I think if you carry that civility and the evidence basis into the debate under the Golden Dome that'll begin in a few weeks, the state has a good chance of ending up with a better program. And as a citizen, I'm very thankful. All right, ready for public comment? Okay, so I only have one person, Kirsten. Did anyone else back here wish to address the task force?
Where do I?
Nope.
Is it right?
You're good.
Take over Kevin's microphone.
Hi there, my name is Kirsten Forsyth. I am the legislative consultant for the Colorado AFL-CIO. I know the letter that we wrote yesterday has received a lot of attention today. I'm sorry I wasn't able to attend earlier. I can read that letter into record, but it appears like everybody's ready to go home. So you've all seen it. The Department of Labor, of course, has it and can provide it to anybody who wants it. But I did want to respond to a few of the questions that came up during the presentation, and also particularly that Pinnacle gave. So first of all, I just want to start off by saying the intent of the letter is not to pick on Pinnacle, and I know it appears that way, and that is only because they are the provider of last resort in the state. So they could be named anything. We could call them United Healthcare, right? And I would still be using that same name. So it's not meant to be attacking the quasi-state governmental entity itself. The intention of the letter was to point out the risk, the grave risk we run in opening up the workers' comp statute in order to allow Pinnacle to provide another line of insurance. And this is something that the Colorado AFL and the workers' comp education attorneys have banded together, sometimes with business, to battle out at the Capitol over and over and over again. It has an impact on both employers and employees in terms of the type of care, but also for employers, it can impact their rates. So my intention here was to raise the red flag. And I know there were a lot of days of presentations by Pinnacle, and we were late getting into this game, and I really apologize for that. I know this is surprising, but I have a lot going on in addition to this. But that was the intention behind this, is to make sure that everybody is aware of what we are doing. And as legislation is drafted, you will actually start to see that we will need to pull in the workers' comp statute, specifically opening up Pinnacle to provide another line of insurance, something that is currently prohibited under statute. And the reason for that is to protect workers' comp, is to protect that fund, and to have Pinnacle focused only on providing the best possible service to injured workers, and to provide good good premiums to employers as well. The last part I just want to point out is that Pinnacle did mention they provide good quality service, and they have a low denial rate. It is objective criteria that they're using. This is a voluntary survey that people fill out. Yes, they have low denial of claims, but part of what happens, it's not like an auto claim or health insurance claim where they just say, well, that's not covered, get out the door. What happens is people will receive initial treatment, they'll get an evaluation, but then the process starts to slow down, specifically around like, oh, you're claiming an injury on both shoulders, but you had an injury on your knee, maybe it's somehow related to your shoulders, right? All sorts of criteria start getting pulled into a workers' comp claim that get very difficult for a worker. So it's not a denial necessarily, and many times it is just a delay, and then they end up in a disputed claim situation where then they have to settle with Pinnacle or the self-insured. Like, let me be clear, I'm trying really hard not to attack Pinnacle, but self-insureds or other insurance companies also do this as well. Part of the settlement agreement terms right now for workers' comp is that they separate their employment, right? They leave their job. There are many things that exist currently under the workers' comp law that are unfair and unjust to workers, but because of the political climate within the building, we have been unable to advance better processes and better claims for workers. So given that, we have extreme reserves about opening up the provider of last resort, and in particular, if you'll notice at the very end of the discussion, you are essentially creating a monopoly for 3 to 4 years until health insurers can figure out the risk, or not health insurers, but other insurers can decide the risk and then come into the market. And again, you're putting Pinnacle in that spot. You're provider of last resort for workers' compensation in the state. And that impacts workers and employers as well. So I am open to take any questions regarding the letter and or conversations you had at our meeting today.
So we've not been able to, we have not the last couple of meetings because we ran out of time. So I don't think we've got it. So
the question is,
so sorry.
Well, this one works better.
The question is, have we been able to ask questions of people providing with public commentary? And we have, I don't think there's a rule. We have run out of time before. And the question was, do we stay past 5 o'clock or do we ask questions? So I'm fine if we want to ask questions. Yes.
So my question is this: is it the AFL-CIO's opposition to Pinnacle having the opportunity to be the private market insurer? And if it was another provider, would AFL-CIO have the same feelings?
So it is not a specific Pinnacle objection. We object to the idea of this going private, period. So even if it wasn't Pinnacle who becomes your provider of last resort and you create a separate provider of last resort, you're still creating a monopoly, and you still have that for-profit incentive that exists for claimants who are coming in the door and trying to get their benefits. So we, as a union and all of our affiliates, agree that public services belong in the public good. And the other part of this is like, if you just look at the workers' comp division right now, they have over 100 employees in there. And I know there's a lot of conversation about, this is going to limit government if we put it over to private entities. This must be regulated, and it would probably be regulated along the same lines as workers' compensation, which if you spent time in that statute is in order to make it better for both employers and employees, we would have to do exactly the same with this. It opens up a whole can of worms that I don't think was a consideration when the Pinnacle idea first came up or when private insurers first came up.
And then my second question is, I thought I heard you say something about if the state was to proceed down this road, that it would require opening the workers' compensation. So can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by that?
So currently, under statute in Colorado, Pinnacle is prohibited from running other lines of insurance. They can only run workers' compensation. And that's part of their overall deal of becoming an insurer of last resort, but then also how the legislature has managed to create this quasi-state run entity. And it is very unique. It is not a private company. I know there's been conversation about it. It is not. It is heavily regulated by the state and has a board that is appointed by the governor. They don't have shareholders, right? So a big part of that is that, sorry, I lost track of my question. Opening up the statute. So part of that is we would have to open up the workers' comp statute and give them express permission to do so. And, from our perspective, once we start dealing with the workers' comp statute, we're having a lot bigger conversations because there are a lot of other things in workers' comp statute we'd like to fix.
Thanks. Hi, Kirsten. Pat Teagarden from Department of Labor and Employment. I'm sitting in for Joe Borrella since he had to attend another meeting down at the Capitol. First of all, to your point about having to revise workers' comp statutes, yes, and I think Pinnacle has always been clear on that point that, in fact, you would technically have to open it up simply because you would need to allow them to, as they were saying, and as I understood listening to their presentation earlier today, to create a sister corporation, which, as they explained it, would include a firewall to ensure no interaction or sharing of data, et cetera, between workers' comp and the paid family and medical leave piece if they were to choose to go into that market. The second thing, you mentioned labor's outright opposition to a private plan. While that's been something that's been discussed here, I do want to say, relative to the regulatory oversight responsibilities that the Department of Labor and Employment would have on this, that we've spent a good deal of time thinking about that. I mean, Jeff and his team from Unemployment Insurance early on over the last several years were looking at it from the point of view of if you were putting together an unemployment insurance-like entity, what would that regulatory program look like? And obviously, UI is different from paid family medical leave. I would emphasize even more so that's the case for workers' compensation, that this is not a workers' compensation program we're talking about. It's paid family medical leave, and I don't think you'd run into the same sort of thing, somebody trying to push a knee off onto a shoulder, et cetera, that you're talking about with regard to complex workers' comp claims. But more importantly than that is that what we've tried to do is we've asked, we've been asking very informally, because there's not a proposal in front of us yet, but we have been asking very informally for Scott Moss and the Wage and Hour Division here, Division of Labor Standards and Statistics, which, as you know, administers our wage theft law and wage complaints generally, would probably be the place where we would put a tailor-made regulatory oversight and assurance of compliance sort of program together. So I just wanted to respond to those.
So I do appreciate that, definitely. And while I do like the department, we work very closely with them, we would request all of that be in statute. And so I would not want that to fall strictly under rulemaking. So when I say like it needs to be heavily regulated, we literally have to take the workers' comp statute and look at everything that we've included in there in terms of heavily regulating insurers and how they report and how claims are processed, and move that over into a separate regulatory structure of family medical leave insurance. It makes it more complicated, more difficult, and inherently, if we're just trying to cut back on government, because you have this profit motive and underlying discriminatory issue happening with doing the underwriting, the department has to be heavily involved. And at that point, why are we deciding to go private? Like, why can't we have it be like UI where we have it based within the state, and the state is regulating and has its fund, it's overseen, and we don't run into issues of discrimination either against, female members who are in some of my industries, or even male members who have, very tough jobs that do wear and tear on their body, and so they end up having to take time out for knee replacements or shoulder replacements that are unrelated to their job, but they have wear and tear on their body. So all of these things would be taken into consideration for different industries, and for our members in particular, they are fairly segregated by gender, truthfully, between the service side and more the trade side, and both of them would be pretty heavily impacted by underwriting.
I was actually going to ask that question. Thanks for addressing that in terms of their industry rating, which they addressed. I don't know if there's anything else to add, but not something we've talked too much about. But it strikes me that there's an entire workers' comp bar of attorneys who their entire practice is workers' comp claims. There's not a UI bar, as far as I'm aware, as we think about social insurance models. So curious if there are any thoughts there, just in terms of that these claims under workers' comp are so contested, and whether there's any concern that the AFL would have in terms of bringing in a for-profit incentive, as you mentioned, in terms of what this looks like for the worker experience.
Yeah. So the simple claims get processed fairly quickly and fairly easily. So if you have just a slip and fall at work or something like that, like those go through pretty easily with both self-insurance and Pinnacle, and I fully agree with them on that. Where things get really complicated are in the really bad accidents at work, whether it's driving. We of course represent truck drivers, falling off of ladders, represent firefighters. There's all sorts of major accidents that happen. That is where things get delayed and pulled behind, and really do impact the workers and their ability to, one, continue work, or worse yet, force them back to work too early. So they end up, deciding that, because they don't have money, and they're not receiving income anymore due to their injury, they go back to work. And whether that be, it doesn't even have to be this insurance company saying, go back to work. It's them saying, I can't afford this anymore. Like, I'm out. I'm going back to work. Or they quit and find another job in order to keep income coming in. Because, again, most people live paycheck to paycheck.
Greg, this is Pat Teagarden again from CDLE, and I just need to respond. And please, this is a very respectful disagreement. Kirsten Forseth and I work very, very closely together on a variety of issues, including workers' comp and unemployment insurance issues. I just need to emphasize for everybody sitting around this table that doesn't live and breathe workers' comp or unemployment insurance, this program that you all have been debating is very, very different from workers' compensation. I mean, workers' compensation, whatever else, is one of the most complex regulatory frameworks I've encountered in my entire career as a regulatory attorney. Having said that, I will also tell you that in terms of, I also want to respectfully disagree, Kirsten, with the idea that we need to put all of the regulatory detail and framework into statute, because it seems to me that what we really need to do is we need to make sure we have a clear idea of the intent of the legislature going forward, and then based on that, come up with a very public rulemaking process, much like we've been doing in Scott's division on minimum wage and wage and order issues. Whether or not that's a preferred model for people is another story, but we certainly have the ability to do that, and I do not think, and I don't want to debate it, I don't want to get into a detailed debate of it right now, although I'd be happy to if everyone wants to, but the regulatory framework for a paid family and medical leave program is significantly different, significantly, I believe, less onerous than what needs to occur within the workers' compensation arena. And the final thing I would point out in terms of the regulatory oversight of insurance product is that this is actually something that's going to be dealt with, would have to be dealt with if the private market option were pursued, would have to be looked at very closely by the insurance commissioner over at Department of Regulatory Agencies as opposed to the workers' comp division here.
All right. Any last questions? Last call for public comment. Anybody in the back? Very well. Kirsten, thanks.
Thank you.
There was a request from somebody in the public. When can we get our updated version of this? And the answer is, we've been editing it as we go along. We'll have it up no later than
6 o'clock tonight.
6 o'clock tonight. That's when second shift begins, by the way. Okay. Yeah. So special thanks to Daniel, Mira, Jamie for handling all the details. Yeah. So big thanks to all of you. There's a lot of work to be done over the next 3 weeks, but I think the relationships that you all have, the mutual appreciation that you expressed earlier, are big assets as you go into that. Does anybody need any additional information, Dana?
So, I knew December 26th, the time to send it to
All right. Does anybody have any questions about their own assignments? I hope not, because I could be confused myself. All right. Well, in that case, turn it back over to you, Lydia, for last words.
Thank you all so much. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, Kevin.
Good night, Kevin.
Thank you, Oscar.
Bye, Oscar and Cher. Good
See
job,
you
Oscar
later.
and Cher.
No, but God.